Gamers, welcome back! In the previous episode, we survived a dragon encounter, stumbled onto an ancient and powerful source of magic which, in turn, made us the main target of both villains in the game. As we're attending our daily school activities and unlocking a bunch of cool gameplay mechanics, we're also trying to understand how all of the past and upcoming events intersect, sending us on an unexpected journey of self-discovery. This hunt for wisdom led us down a rabbit hole that, in the end, led us to a hidden underground chamber located somewhere under Hogwarts. 4 portraits guard the secrets of our newly acquired power, and only by completing their challenges will we gain the right of understanding both its origin and the severity of the situation if it ever ended up in the wrong hands. It took about 12 hours of completionist gameplay to get to this point, and all of it was spent roaming around the school grounds. Now, we're asked, for the first time ever, to leave our comforts behind and travel 1,600 meters into the unknown, clearly signifying to the player that it's time to enter the open world portion of the game. Now, before we go on a big adventure, I want to stress 2 things real quick, with the first one being the importance of watching part 1 before actually moving into this video. Part 2 is a direct continuation of the ideas, concepts, and criticisms that were made in that previous video. This in turn means that not only will you be lacking a lot of the context if you decide to break the chronology, but it will most probably also affect the way that you interpret the new ideas presented throughout the second portion of our journey. Therefore, if you haven't seen it or you need a refresher, I urge you to pause this video and follow the link found in the video description below. The second important thing that I want to mention is that if you want to support the channel and everything that I do here, please do subscribe, as less than 2% of you are. And, for the first time ever, you can also follow me on Instagram. I'll be using the platform to keep you posted on my progress and write reviews for games that I don't have the time to make a full video on. I'll also be sharing my thoughts on the gaming industry at large, informing you of any layoffs, studio closures, or anything else worth mentioning, and so much more. If that sounds interesting to you, then do check it out when you get the chance. With all that out of the way, I welcome you to the part 2 video of my Hogwarts Legacy retrospective. This is going to be another long one, folks, so please sit back and relax, grab yourself something to drink as always, as I welcome you to leave Hogwarts with me and adventure into the unknown. Hogwarts is located in the Highlands of Scotland, and, as most of the map doesn't really appear in the movies, the devs had a unique opportunity on their hands. For the first time since the beginning of the game, they didn't have a concrete guide on how any of it should actually look like. It's for that reason that the devs started off by compiling a bunch of videos and pictures taken from its real-life counterpart. I've never been to Scotland myself, but by doing a quick Google image search, I can rapidly see the similarities between the landscape and its replica. It's a combination of mountains and valleys, decorated with a random concentration of trees and bushes. There are a lot of lakes that help separate the land and feed the whole ecosystem. Those same areas also shelter the wildlife and ensure prosperity for generations to come. Additionally, Scotland also has a lot of castles and other abandoned structures. The team, wanting to stay as faithful as possible, partnered with Historic Environment Scotland, who were able to provide them with detailed pictures and even 3D scans of the monuments that survived the test of time. There's nothing better than a good reference for a concept artist, says Sebastian Gallego, the concept art lead of the game. It just brings a level of authenticity you cannot get otherwise. Your imagination and memories can only get you so far. He goes on by saying that, when you understand your source material, it allows you to be more creative and spend your energy designing the place instead of worrying about the details nature really took care of for you. I think that this quote represents the map's layout quite well, because there's a certain level of authenticity that's hard to describe, let alone explain in a video like this. It feels organic traversing the map. Nothing feels out of place and everything seems to have a realistic footprint. Forests are dense enough that it feels like you're in one, but also aren't too big that it feels endless and annoying to go through. They also serve as the main hub for all sorts of different ecosystems, encouraging you to keep an eye out just in case you might catch a glimpse of something spontaneous and rare. Marshes and lakes also help break the monotony of the land, giving you a challenge when crossing it on foot. All those aspects are also contained between multiple mountains, selling us the idea that this world is hidden in between a valley that Muggles just haven't discovered yet. Then, once you've unlocked the second part of the map, the layout changes for a rocky beachside view that contrasts heavily with the rest of the game. The plains are mainly clear of obstruction, with the occasional rock or abandoned structure blocking your way. I quite love the environment they created here. The way that the light reflects on the water as you fly around with your broom, admiring the ruins of the world lost to time, is quite mesmerizing. It's a reminder of a time simpler than ours, and in a world where humans gradually learn to neglect the source of all creation, it's a relaxing way to unwind and remind ourselves of the land that made it all possible. In a sense, it has that Stardew Valley kind of vibe, and when looking back at my gameplay footage, I realized that most of it was spent cruising around aimlessly while admiring the scenery. Like I've said many times before, it's a beautiful game, and it's one more moment that shows just how dedicated the devs were at creating a world that immerses the player no matter what they were doing. This same world philosophy also applies to the many hamlets that populate the land. They are mainly composed of a few houses, a shop or two, and a handful of industrial buildings used to process and store whatever the land yields. All combined, it takes about a minute to run from one end to another, which means that every important aspect of the townsfolk lives have been condensed around the main square. They morphed the land that they needed to survive, creating mills and livable structures along the way, while leaving the rest intact. Nature is obviously an important part of their lives, so they only took what they needed and respectfully left everything else as is. It's beautiful, and when you fly just perfectly above everything in the sunlight, the colors that vividly reflect back at you leave a strong, lasting impression. I remember being genuinely impressed by the richness and color that the game so casually renders, that I was sure that these devs had more experience than they actually did. While we're at it, we might as well see how it all translates to gameplay. Here's a faithful reenactment of how it feels to go town hopping for the first time. We arrive at a newly discovered hamlet called Pit Upon Ford, so the first logical step would be to activate the flue flame. From there, we can see that there are a few interactable icons on the map, so we head to the closest chest, only to discover that the entrance door is locked. Using Revelio, we can see that there are a few things that we can collect, so we proceed to do so. Then, we head to the second nearest chest on the map, which also ends up being locked inside a house. Next building is unlocked, so we head inside and explore the surroundings. I head to the end of the room and interact with the cup on the table. I drink all of its content, and while we're at it, I might as well steal all the money on top of the table. From there, we go up the stairs and follow the floor of the corridor. I steal some more money, interact with the piano, and head up another set of stairs. The master bedroom is tiny and, weirder still, has nothing for us to interact with. There's also a weird statue of a monkey holding a sphere, which seems out of place somehow. I don't know how, but it kinda does. Regardless, with nothing piquing our interest, we leave the house and head to the main square. I interact with the shopkeeper and, after a short dialogue, I get the option of asking her some questions. Let's start with the first one.
Any whispers of anything going about the town?
There's a rampant dug bug on the loose. It's more aggressive than others and has some peculiar markings. It's making life miserable in Pit Upon Ford. I wish someone would do something about it.
So, no quest? Let's try the next one.
Can you tell me more about yourself?
Oh, I haven't had a normal conversation with anyone for a while, so pardon me if I'm a little rusty. My father passed away recently and I've been completely occupied with keeping the business afloat. I hadn't realised how much work went into running a shop. Inventories, maintenance, customers, bills, accounts, and on and on.
So we can't even reply, ask questions, or just push the discussion further? It just ends here? Like, what was the point? Let's try the last one.
What can you tell me about your shop?
It may not be as fine as what you'd find in Hogsmeade, but I think we have a certain rustic charm all of our own. We sell all sorts of beast byproducts for potion making. Some of the rarer stuff too. That all falls on me now.
I hope the next NPC will be more interesting, because honestly this was a waste of time. With no more available options, I then asked to see her wares, and nothing really stands out to me. She's really only selling some basic animal ingredients, which are easily obtainable for the most part. At least I know where to go in case I feel lazy and don't really feel like grinding for resources. Speaking of collecting resources, let's take this opportunity to sell some junk before moving on. Afterwards, I run through the town and find another one of those pages in front of an unlocked house. I enter it and find 2 chests, which I proceed to loot. As there's nothing else for me to do, I decide to go and search for that duck bog that the shopkeeper complained about. I kill a few spiders along the way, and when I finally find it, I use my ancient magic to pulverize it out of existence. Interesting, so the attack is either damage based or level based. Either way, it means that stronger enemies will be able to tank through the attack. After finding it some more, I finally got the upper hand and ended its life. I went back to the shopkeeper to share the good news, and I can't even bring it up? Lame, but I do get it though. This wasn't a quest to begin with, which explains why I can't tell her that the deed is done. It then makes me wonder why she even mentioned it to us if there was no point in completing the encounter. With all avenues currently exhausted, let's move on to the next town on the map, called the Upper Hogsmeade. There's a message board next to the Flue Flame with a message that warns us against a dangerous duck bog. Yeah, dangerous. You mean like the last one we fought? Sure, whatever. We move on and see that this hamlet has a side quest for us, which means that, unless clearly telegraphed, we won't get any side quests from normal NPCs. Kind of disappointing, but at least we don't have to search for them. We enter the first house, and after eating some peanuts, stealing some more money, and opening a chest, there isn't much to go on. We exit through the front door, and look at that! There's some kind of event happening in the town square. It looks really cool.
By Ranrock's loyalists. It's not right.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Wait a minute. Why can I hear many more instruments than just a circular trumpet? Also, why can't I hear the trumpet at all? Like, if it's there, then why isn't it the lead instrument?
I could go on tour.
Okay, let's see what else there is to see here. Okay, so more locked doors. Another locked door. Oh, there's a butterbeer storage facility. That should be really cool to check out, right? Oh, it's just another chest for me to open. Then we go around the building. There's another page for me to grab at the reception. At the top of the ladder, there's a chest next to a guy that's... Honestly, I have no idea what he's doing. It's quite random for sure. And too bad I can't even ask him what he's doing. I then turn the corner and look at that. It's an open pub. Love it. Oh, there's gossip in the corner. Let's go and see what they're talking about.
I had plenty of opportunity to pursue anything I wanted. Good brain, that's what the teachers would say.
How is standing behind a till counting knuts and sickles considered work?
Ah, the secret is do the hard work first, and let the easy bits take care of themselves.
You'll not cast successfully if you don't first see it happen in your own mind.
Pushing a plough is good, honest work, but I shall leave it to the muggles.
Wow. Interesting stuff. Okay, well, this sucks, so let's just sit down and unwind. Waiter, I would like a cup of your best butterbeer, please. Oh? I can't sit down or interact with any of the chairs, plates, beer bottles? However, I can steal from the guy and no one even moves a finger? Okay, moving on. There's a shed located on the outskirts of the village. The door's unlocked, so I enter inside and... Oh, cool! An Iron Maiden. I bet those books have dark magic in them as well. The skull here was a dead giveaway after all. Too bad I can't interact with any of it, or let the villagers know that someone's been into some dungeon level stuff, if you know what I mean. Finally, we get to the last house of the hamlet, which, surprisingly enough, contains some lore documents. Turns out that this is the house where we received the unique quest for the Hufflepuff household, so these 3 documents serve to flesh out the motive of the aura related to that quest. However, if you're playing as any other house like I am now, these now serve to bloat the experience because they serve no purpose other than to give you some information on something totally irrelevant. If you have played a quest like we have, then it fares better, but not by much. We learned that she loved her job as an auror and that she regrets going into retirement because she's left a lot of cases unsolved. She also regrets how she wasn't able to save Anne and wonders if more innocent people were imprisoned because of the actions of the Ministry. There's more to it, but you basically get the point. All of this is known stuff, so ironically, the only thing that's actually new information is the last line in every discussion, which reveals that she's really bad at gardening and that she decides, by the end, to try a new hobby. Exhilarating, right? Oh, and her house elf doesn't even care that I barged into the place unannounced. He's never seen me before, but that doesn't stop him from ghosting me as I shoot spells in his direction. Honestly, this was really disappointing. I really miss Hogwarts and I've only just left it. Let's look at my quest catalog and see what we can do. Awesome! So I have 3 quests that require that I go back to Hogwarts. Oh, and there are also 2 quests that I can do at the same time? The Herbology quest requires that I acquire and use both a Venomous Tentacula and a Mandrake while in combat. Sounds simple enough. The second quest is for my dear old potions teacher. He wants us to use a Thunderbrew potion while in battle and to randomly waste an invisibility potion. The reward for both is also a new spell, which is quite cool. I could definitely use some teacher-student bonding right now, just like we did in both previous classes. Man, this is gonna be sick! Okay, turns out that I already have what we need in my inventory, so let's find a random battle somewhere. Oh, a cow. Cool. Here we go. This is perfect. Don't mind me, random pedestrian. I have a few goblins to pulverize. Okay, we pull out a Mandrake and use it on a bunch of enemies. Now we use the other plant, which doesn't register for some reason. Oh, it did. Okay, on to the next quest. We select the Thunderbrew and use it immediately. Oh, cool. I love the lightning effect. Now we're just missing a wand shaped like Thor's hammer and we're good to go. Now that everyone's dead, we waste a functioning invisibility potion and we've completed another assignment. Although, now that I think about it, I don't see the point between me using potions and plants as a prerequisite for the spells. Like, using a Mandrake and a Tentacula won't make me better at using Wingardium Leviosa, unless they're combined, which I doubt because you can't cast spells while holding a Mandrake and the other plant is a fixed plant. Same goes for Potions class. Let's see how the devs explain those aspects, starting with the cutest teacher in school. Wow, that is lame. Why wasn't there any dialogue, sound effects, or interactable elements? Why were we forced to just look at other students taking part in the lesson and not let us join them? Man, I hope that talking to her after class was worth the effort.
I've completed my assignments, Professor.
Pleased to hear it. Professor Weasley will be too. I'll be sure to let her know how well you're coming along.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor Hecat tells me she taught you Levioso, so you should be ready for a more advanced levitation charm. Wingardium Leviosa requires a bit of concentration and a nice, graceful wand movement. Let's see you try your hand at it. When executed correctly, you should be able to pick up boulders as though they were sprigs of sneezewort.
Wait, that's really it? I hope that Professor Sharp does better, because I could really use something worth my time. Well, it seems that we're also here after hours. No matter. Come on, Professor Sharp!
Show me what you got!
I finished the tasks, Professor.
Well, well. I trust you are meticulous in your efforts. After all, shortcuts only ever lead to shortcomings.
Well, I don't know about meticulous, but I did as I was asked.
I'd advised doing more than the bare minimum if you want to hone your skills as quickly as possible. Talent and resolve are a potent combination. It would be a shame to let that go to waste.
Thank you, Professor.
Don't let it go to your head. Now, Let's see how you fare with Diffindo. Wand at the ready. Focus. Diffindo can be dangerous if you're not paying attention. Very good.
So there was no point to any of it. Why did I have to do all of this if it didn't matter? Why couldn't I just lied, telling them that I did it and got to learn the spells? Alright. I guess it's time that we remove the smoke and mirrors that the game has given us so far and delve deep in what the rest of the experience actually is. Let me clarify the issue that I have with the two quests that we just saw, because those are some of the main reasons as to why, the further you get into the game, the less the main and side quests are engaging to the player. The first problem is that there's rarely, if ever, any correlation between what you're doing and the reward promised for completing it. This might seem very trivial to some, but the issue is that the game sets up our expectations quite well before proceeding to refuse to uphold it. When you start the game, you learn the basic casting spell to clear some debris that, oddly enough, never reappears in the game. Then, you learn Revelio because you're locked off in the vault and you're the only one that can find the exit. You then learn Lumos to complete a puzzle so that you may proceed with the challenges. Afterwards, when you get to school, all the classes are centered around teaching you a new spell or potion, while also showing you how it's used early on in the campaign. More concretely, it makes sense that you'd learn Leviosa in a combat environment because that's how you'll be mainly using it in the game. Accio is taught by pulling a book towards you, which makes sense as you'll be mostly collecting a bunch of flying pages in the early game. The only time that it's obvious that it won't always be the case will be when Professor Ronan asks us to collect pages as a prerequisite for the Reparo spell. There's no logical link between both actions other than the fact that, by repairing statues, you're rewarded with another page. Although, I'm sure that most of you didn't mind doing it because of the second reason why quests so far worked. All of them has some level of fan service that the game blatantly used at every opportunity to get us emotionally invested with the action on screen. You also taught spells that appear in the movies in almost every quest, and, with almost all side quests tied to the main one, it always feels like you're progressing rapidly through a joint narrative. More concretely, at this point in time, you'll only be missing 6 spells, or 9 if you count the unforgivable spells, which I'll touch on later. That means that, in about 12 hours of gameplay, the game taught you 14 spells and unlocked 7 side abilities with the addition of the skill tree. It's also for those reasons that you'll soon realize that you're not incentivized to explore the world until the game requires that you do so. Activities are locked off because of how dependent most of them are on specific spells. Hell, we haven't even unlocked the side quest that teaches us how to unlock locked doors, and you've seen just how many of them are present in those 2 hamlets alone. That side quest only becomes available after you've completed 3 additional main quests, which is crazy in my opinion. That same quest also adds another collectible, adding even more repetitiveness to the exploration. It's no surprise then why the remainder of the game sucks when compared to its stellar first 12 hours. There's no fan service left to hide its tutorials, so they basically stopped trying. It's almost as if the devs are saying, here's a few other tutorials for you to complete, and when you've completed them, we'll teach you another tutorial.
Thank you, come again.
The situation is aggravated even more when you factor in what rapidly feels like a blatant open world, and I wouldn't argue with you if you felt as if the game pulled a bait and switch on you, because it totally did. The intro sequence works because it fulfilled the student fantasy of learning new spells, taking part in a bunch of cool classes, and getting the chance to try them out in a school setting. It's what we all wanted from the game, and the devs gave us that consistently until they decided that they were no longer going to fulfill it. What started off as our home has now become the parent that wants us to leave so that we may forge our own legacy. Ready or not, it's time for us to face what's coming, and honestly, they couldn't have executed it any worse. Hogwarts Legacy is primarily an open world game, unlike what the game initially wants you to believe. However, in order to understand why Hogwarts Legacy fails in its main offering, we first need to understand what an open world is and what makes it so memorable when done right. First of all, an open world game, as opposed to a linear experience, is a game that lets the player freely explore the map and make tangible decisions, impulsively or not, as the game does as little hand-holding as possible. You can actually see the difference between both philosophies in Hogwarts Legacy. The first 12 hours are extremely linear when compared to the rest of the experience. The game restricts you in a castle location and gives you clear goals for what you need to do to progress the story. It feels formulaic and, when playing the game, you'll be inclined to play it in a similar way as I have so far. However, that's not to say that Hogwarts fits the basic definition of a linear experience, as the game starts off more like an open hub than a linear corridor experience. To be even more precise, you can actually see the difference between both types when comparing the first mission with those that preceded it. One major difference is that there's no way for you to be creative and go exploring during the whole quest. The game forces you to go from point A to point B, while requiring that you find solutions to problems that were programmed ahead of time. This then means that anyone playing through this mission will share a similar pacing and won't have much variety between two players doing the same quest. This can be a good thing as, like in Hogwarts, it can be used to naturally include tutorials while also creating set pieces that push the narrative forward. More importantly, it allows the devs to meticulously control all aspects of the mission. In Alo, for example, the devs use its corridor-like map designs to create obstacles for the player to overcome and subsequently use against its enemies. As every environment is handcrafted, they're made in such a way that it encourages spontaneity in the player, which, in turn, feels immersive and rewarding to overcome. It's the main reason why, in my opinion, Halo Infinite isn't as memorable as its peers. It was designed as an open world game, meaning that there's a lot of downtime that has to be integrated into the game's design, which in turn forces the devs to sacrifice its fast-paced and moment-to-moment combat for an open-ended experience that lets the player decide the next activity that they want to take part in. This also means that linear games are ultimately shorter experiences than their counterparts because there aren't many possible deviations. Let's say the linear video game plays out like a movie and that you're starring in the main role. The story and the way that you'll accomplish the tasks are predetermined by the developers. Replaying the game also won't make a substantial difference on how the game unravels itself because there's no space for the player to be creative. The enjoyment then comes from the player either interacting with the main gameplay loop or by unraveling the story. Halo is all about that intuitive gameplay that's easy to play but hard to master. Story is second, even if it's one of the best in the industry. Same goes with the Doom series. Up until recently, they would only provide a context as to why you were committing atrocious acts, and then let you experience it at your own leisure. However, unlike what I made it sound so far, gameplay isn't always everything. You also have games like Murder So Suspect or Life is Strange, where the gameplay takes the back seat in favor of a rich narrative. There's obviously way more to all of this than what I'm insinuating, and each game mentioned so far definitely deserves its own video. The point that I want to make is that linear experiences are exactly what they sound like. It's linear by nature, which means that it doesn't require much to function. It essentially needs its main offering to be strong if it wants to satisfy the player and not get refunded along the way. Hogwarts Legacy does this quite well at the very beginning because it fulfills the main promise. It keeps its gameplay engaging while teaching you a new spell on a regular basis, while also giving you opportunities to use them. Story-wise, it reminds us of the books and the movies as frequently as humanly possible. The game also resembles its movie counterpart, and it's therefore filled with scripted events that keep the experience engaging and exciting. Open world games, on the other hand, take a completely opposite approach when it comes to its gameplay and map design. Take Skyrim for example. Everyone starts the game in the same way. Your carriage arrives at the village where you're supposed to get executed. Although, as luck would have it, the ceremony gets ambushed by a dragon, freeing you from your captives and starting you off on your journey. However, from this point onward, the game will only make suggestions on where you should go next if you want to continue the main story. Unlike linear experiences, you're free to explore the realm at your own pace as the game is centered around giving the player as many options and opportunities as possible throughout its travels. It's the decisions that the players take and their overall immersion in the game's universe that forges the main narrative in the mind of the player. In other words, it's not so much about the destination as it's about the journey. As each player has different interests and priorities, the way and the order that actions are taken are unique to that playthrough, hence why they end up feeling more immersive in the long run. It's the reason why, in Fallout 4 for example, a bunch of memes were created on the way that fans completed the main quest. The main goal of that game is to find your kidnapped son and avenge your husband's death. But in true open world fashion, even if the game treats that quest line with grave importance, most players chose to disregard it and spend in-game years doing absolutely anything else. By the time they decide to finally pursue the quest that started it all, they were already max level with their character. They built multiple settlements, which in turn allowed the residents to raise their own children faster than we took care of ours. We also ended up destroying most factions, saved others, got remarried, and the list goes on, and that's totally fine. The fun comes from the role-playing factor and seeing how many ways you can complete the same or similar quest in different ways. You might, for example, decide to murder the quest giver, keeping the loot for yourself, pickpocketing him, and getting bad karma. You can also do the opposite and keep your side of the bargain while being accompanied by the NPC that you married early on. That decision alone changes the perspective that the player has on the quest, because he's no longer seeing it as an everyday task, but as an activity that he gets to do with his better half. Open world games, in turn, are easier to get lost in because their approach to gameplay feels more open-ended than a meticulously crafted experience. These games try to offer as many options as possible so that the player may feel like his decisions matter. Then, the magic appears when the game adequately reacts to those decisions and forces the player to adapt in the moment. It's therefore very easy to sink hours into those kinds of games because they aren't as concentrated in crafting a main story as opposed to letting the player craft its own. The best example that I can share with you is when I bought Final Fantasy XV on release. I rapidly had reached about 110 hours in real life, and I didn't even finish the 3rd chapter of the main quest. The reason for that is quite simple. I was so immersed in the world that I was inhabiting that the journey through those plains was mesmerizing me. I found the world engaging, memorable, and breathtaking. I also found the combat addicting, and the skill trees even more rewarding, to the point that I adored grinding levels by redoing the same battles over and over again. Then, when I needed a break, I would usually either go fishing or sit down next to the fire pit and take a break with the 3 digital characters that felt closer to me than most of my colleagues at work. I'm sure that none of you listening had the same experience as I had playing this game, and that's the point here. Open world games are defined by their options, and it's that fine line between offering player choice and creating unscripted events that are out of the player's control that forge the gameplay narrative. This can all be summed up in what The Witcher 3 devs dubbed the 40-second rule. Essentially, as the player is traversing the world, there should be something that makes him deviate from his intended path every 40 seconds or less. As the player heads towards his next objective, he should encounter opportunities that encourage him to make unscheduled stops and do something spontaneous. He might see an enemy encounter from afar and decide to head in that direction. He might also be forced to avoid an environmental obstacle, like a lake or a mountain, which in turn forces him to go around it, making him discover an abandoned building that may hold some loot or even a side quest. He might also see a structure in the distance that piques his interest and decides to make a detour to unravel its mysteries. Basically, every time that the game succeeds in making the player deviate from its path, it creates player engagement because it makes the world feel that much less programmed and more random, spontaneous, and real. It gives the player the illusion of choice, creating long-term player retention. There's also one last factor which is important to consider. The game needs to offer fun alternatives that reward the player for taking part in its extra curriculum. Your game can have collectibles, for example, but if getting them is more trouble than they're worth, then you've succeeded in bloating the experience and annoying the player every time he chooses not to take part in the activity. What differentiates a good open world game from a memorable one is the solid gameplay loop, made even stronger when combined with a stellar context that gives meaning to what the player is doing. If you can make the player want to take part in a specific gameplay mechanic and you've given him a valid reason to do so, you've essentially created gameplay gold. Games are really hard to make, and the bigger the scope, the harder it is to regularly create a sense of player engagement. It's the reason why open world games currently have a negative connotation. Too many games fail to motivate the player in committing long term to its different offerings, and, unfortunately, I think that Hogwarts Legacy has succeeded in combining all of the bad traits into one package. Let's start off with the 40-second rule. Do know that this isn't something that's set in stone or that all open world games take into consideration. However, I personally think that it's one that makes a lot of sense. The Witcher 3 was critically acclaimed because of, among other things, how the world felt real to the player. It felt like it had and will continue to exist even without the player's influence, and that rule helps ensure that the game keeps selling its illusion consistently. When the opposite happens and you're not interrupted often enough, it makes the game feel stale and unengaging, especially in the long run. It feels like little is happening, and it's our actions that create waves in the world around us, which isn't ideal considering that open world games try to emulate real life. Hogwarts Legacy suffers from this issue greatly for two main reasons. The first one comes from the lack of variety in the environmental design. Going from one end of the map to the next feels the same, as they're essentially composed of 4 specific landmarks. You have forests that look like any typical forest. There aren't any talking trees, magical beings other than a handful of enemy types, and the rare centaur encounters, or anything that's really helping it differentiate itself from a forest in any other open world game. Then, you have your flat terrains where you can see miles ahead of you. It's good at letting you see your options ahead, so in that sense, it does indeed encourage the player to deviate from its plans and create memorable moments. The opposite is unfortunately also true, which is that there's nothing to surprise the player as he can see everything miles ahead of him. It makes it less likely that he'll want to take part in the obstacles because he's had the time to reflect on it and decide if it was worth his time or not. Obviously, if the devs created engaging events that the player would choose to take part in, regardless if he saw them ahead of time or not, then it would be a different story. Although, as you will soon see, those don't really exist in Hogwarts Legacy, and common encounters can only get you so far. Next are the ruins that litter the landscape. These certainly have their charm and do help create a sense of long-term history. However, the issue that sours their inclusion is that they have nothing else to offer but what's obvious at first glance. They mainly serve as a landmark for a single activity, and because of its lack of variety, they lose their appeal as rapidly as it takes to complete the side quest. This is also made more apparent when you realize that there's no unique reward for visiting them, as the game's based its economy, reward system, and player customization on fast fashion. I'll touch more on this as we go, but the idea is that because absolutely everything that you do gives you the same kind of reward, you'll be less incentivized to complete quests that don't stand out. One thing that does stand out is the last category in the environmental design. Those are the specifically created landmarks that were created with a purpose, either because of the license or because of the narrative. Hogwarts and Hogsmeade fall in this category, as well as the Forbidden Forest and a bunch of mining facilities scattered around the map. The Dark Forest is immediately distinguishable because of its color palette. You can immediately tell that you've entered the Forbidden Forest when the screen goes from sunny into a distinctively dark blue tint. It sucks the color out of the environment, giving it that signature dread that you've grown accustomed to seeing in the movies. You also have the industrial structures that contrast with its surroundings. Most of the map feels unaffected by human interactions, so these areas serve to spice up the offering and create a contrast. This then indirectly brings up another problem, which is that, on top of most of the map feeling plain and slightly auto-generated, there's also nothing in place that makes us see or interact with the world in a different way. For example, the day and night cycle brings very little change to the world and the way that we interact with it. The lighting of the day doesn't vary that much from one day to another, and the switch to nighttime is too rapid in my opinion. To make matters even worse, I find that the day and night cycle changes mainly during loading screens, which then robs us of the richness that comes from the different positioning of the sun. Add in the lack of rain, thunder, tornadoes, and anything else that you can imagine, and it all starts to feel very uniform. This is then aggravated further when considering that the player's bond with the landscape is robbed even further by the inclusion of the broom and the animal mounts. Let's take Elden Ring as an example once more. You might get to the edge of a cliff and see something that's way below you with no clear way on how to get there. This will then force you to scrutinize the landscape both visually and when examining the map. Then, once you committed to a plan, you'll then have to figure out how to even execute it, as it might involve huge detours that might bring up more issues later on. In Hogwarts Legacy, no such challenges exist because you can spawn a broom at any given moment, which in turn proceeds over all obstacles on the map. Height and distance aren't an issue, and as the map is absolutely massive, you're incentivized to use the broom or mount as much as possible. The positive of this approach is that it does fulfill the player's fantasy of flying on a broom and using it to get to the game's different landmarks. Its lack would have definitely been enough for some to not buy the game, so it was indeed necessary to include it. On the flip side, however, the problem is that, with an option that avoids most of the challenges of traversal, the devs should have figured out ways to flesh out the gameplay and make its inclusion an asset that bends multiple gameplay mechanics together. Currently, you can't cast spells while riding your broom or mount. There are no air-based enemies or obstacles that could hinder your progress. There's no collision damage or penalties for driving like a drunkard GTA style. I find it quite jaw-dropping that this mechanic was greenlit and released the way that it was, because there's nothing in place to keep the player engaged throughout the journey. It's such a problem, in fact, that after you've unlocked most fast travels, you'll be more inclined to use them, knowing that you won't be missing anything by skipping the trip. If that wasn't bad enough, the only activity that the devs were able to include that requires the broom is 5 races between you and Imelda Reyes. These are very simple races where you have to go through rings to gain boosts, which in turn allow you to beat the required time. Nothing extraordinary, but it does the job nonetheless. My only gripe is that there aren't more of these in the game. Each race takes about 2-3 minutes to complete, and in a game that takes about 60 hours to 100%, having more would have added that much needed variety in the activities. Anyways, winning all of them would allow the Quidditch shopkeeper in Hogsmeade to upgrade your flying capabilities. Before this point, you could fly as long as you wanted, but when boosting, it would deplete your stamina bar rapidly, forcing you to slow down after a few seconds. It would also automatically recharge when either releasing the boost button or waiting a few seconds or by sticking close to the ground. This is a good start in keeping the player focused when flying, as, in order to maximize their flight performance, he will have to learn the rhythm of flight and adapt his traversal tactics as he goes along. It's important to note that it's far from necessary to use the boost. Normal flight speed is decent enough, but the knowledge that you could be going even faster is often enticing enough to take part in the mechanic. After getting the last upgrade, however, it removes the stamina bar entirely, which is a cool reward. But it also makes the traversal experience even more bland, removing the only stimuli during your travels. Even so, I think that the biggest sin that the devs made in this regard is that it doesn't really feel that magical to explore, both emotionally and visually. You won't meet other fellow travelers or students outside of the Hamlets. Enemies also don't explore the map, as I stated previously, so it really feels like all structures are separated by even more empty space. This is then hammered in even further by the overall lack of wildlife, both on the ground and in the air. As most creatures serve a purpose in the room or requirement, the devs therefore programmed them to stay inside a predetermined perimeter, making it impossible for them to leave and explore the realm. This also allows the devs to add a map marker showing where every creature resides at all times. It's convenient for sure, but I think that it damages the overall experience more because its lack of realism breaks the immersion factor, and its lack of challenge also makes the whole experience very underwhelming. If, on the other hand, all animals were freely roaming the map, we would have had to track them down and pay attention to the movement of the landscape, hence giving our flying session some much more needed purpose. Ironically, the only animals that are free of this restriction are the non-magical deers that often clip through the landscape. I can't even recall seeing any hippogriffs or other types of magical beings really flying around the sky other than during a handful of scripted events. Just to prove my point even further, the only time that the game ever attempts to counter my criticisms is when a shopkeeper randomly installs a temporary shop on an open field. It initially gives us a sense of kinship because, finally, I found someone else that was taking part in its own adventure. I therefore naturally expected that the traveler would have some stories to share, tips on where to go next, where to avoid, or anything else that was worth sharing with the player. However, as you probably guessed, no such thing was programmed in the game. Interacting with the NPC brings you straight to the shopping menu, where you'll be able to purchase the same items as you've seen in other brick-and-mortar businesses. It's even more anticlimactic when you discover that the only item that's actually exclusive to those shopkeepers is only 4 unique cosmetics for your broom. But as the game will give you all other cosmetics just for playing the game, well, you'll rapidly lose interest and proceed to avoid the only humans that aren't trying to hinder your progress. Overall, the problem with the map design is that it lacks a lot of the supporting systems you'd expect from seeing in an open world game. I mean, what's the point of having a huge explorable map if it feels lifeless and uneventful once you get used to its presentation? In a game where moving from place to place is part of the core experience, the devs left it so undeveloped that everything else suffers as a result. Mountains lose their defining traits when you can fly over them with ease. Rivers and lakes no longer define the landscape when it blurs out of view in the same way that Hamlets appear on screen. 40 seconds turn into 40 minutes of uninterrupted gameplay, which in turn ends up feeling more like 4 hours of monotony. What makes this whole situation worse, if you can even believe it to be possible, is that the busy work you're encouraged to take part in is as intricate as the rest of the experience. Challenges, as the devs call it, is a section of the book that primarily keeps score of all the collectibles and, like the name insinuates, challenges that litter the open space. For example, one of the 2 challenges related to flying requires that I'll land on a stationary circular platform. The other one sees you smashing into some random balloons that are floating in a straight line. Those are the only 2 activities in the whole game that require flying, so I hope you found those interesting, because you have about 30 of them to complete for each. Thankfully, there's a lot more variety in the on-foot category. Going left to right, the first category keeps track of all the enemies you've defeated during your travels. Those include dark wizards, goblins and their stronger counterparts, as well as the inferi, spiders, and trolls. It works in the way that you would expect, with you gaining rewards as you reach certain thresholds. Same goes with the quest section, which helps you keep tabs on how far you've progressed in each category. Although, the one that most influences your interactions with the open world is called Exploration. You will find both broom categories that I mentioned previously, as well as the other on-foot categories, with the first one requiring that you collect traces of ancient magic in abandoned ruins. On paper, it's a pretty cool idea because, to get to each location that holds a fragment, you have to complete a few simple puzzles and do some basic platforming. For example, you have to burn some vines, destroy a few obstacles, or move a few boxes around to either liberate the way forward or create a stepping stone to a higher level. At the same time, you also unlock chests as you progress, incentivizing you to explore and try different paths. Once you've completed the quest and collected all 3 ancient magic fragments, the quest ends, the book makes note of it, and you proceed to never return there with that character. That all sounds good, but the issue is that portions, if not the whole puzzle, can be circumvented with the use of the broom. Because there are no collision detection and anything really to prevent you from flying all over the ruins, you'll be able to, in most cases, skip the platforming in the puzzles and just fly to your objective. Weirdly enough, the only thing that you're allowed to do while flying is picking up stuff on the ground, so the only real obstacle that will prevent you from completing the experience is the rare instances where the room is sealed and you're required to cast a spell like Confringo or Incendio to open the way forward. Now, you could argue that it's optional to do it this way, and that options are a welcomed addition when it comes to the open-ended quests. That does make sense on the surface level, and, in a way, I do definitely agree. Unfortunately, that's not how it works in practice. The real issue is that no one will purposefully take the long way once they find out that there's a faster and more efficient way of completing an activity that appears a total of 20 times on the map. Let me give you a concrete example. Most ruins are solved in the same way, but rarely, you'll find one with a lot more effort put into it. What makes this ruin more intriguing is the fact that the devs integrated the toad travel system that I mentioned previously. With so many options in front of you, the devs plan for you to interact with one of them, let it teleport you somewhere specific, and then give the player some space to assess the situation. Repeat the process until you collected all 3 ancient magic traces and the deed is done. The problem is that, even if the gimmick is of the much needed variety that the game needs, I can still make my broom appear and collect all of the traces by simply flying through the holes in the ceiling. It's also faster because you won't have to try multiple avenues, destroy some walls, and repeat the process. All you have to do is swoop into the area, collect the item, and then fly out the same way. Overall, a better puzzle would have incorporated both flying and on-foot segments, forcing the player to alternate and think outside the box. What makes this situation even weirder is that this set of challenges is made available long after you've gained the ability to roam the skies. Its inclusion should have therefore been a requirement when designing the event, as, instinctively, they should have known that the players would have attempted to try reaching high waypoints with their brooms. So, either the devs didn't know how to circumvent this issue, or these were supposed to be unlocked way earlier in the game and were pushed back for some reason. My vote goes for the first option, which will make even more sense once I explain the next puzzle, which is those god-forsaken Trials of Merlin. This is one of the main quests that I skipped earlier in the video because it has zero influence on the main story and its sole purpose is to introduce the main side content of the game. The quest starts off with an older lady screaming for help. Dark wizards are harassing her because that's just what they do. We defeat them pretty rapidly and, as thanks for being such a brave student, she decides to share with us the reason she decided to camp at a specific spot in the first place. Long story short, she's been obsessed about her studies of one of the most influential wizards of all time, Merlin. After spending months scrutinizing every little detail in his diary, she thinks that she discovered something new and therefore decided to leave on an excursion and test her theories. What is this theory, you might be wondering? Well, she believes that every spherical platform found scattered on the grounds of the Highlands holds the key to one of Merlin's trials, hence the name. The problem is that no one has been able to figure out how to unlock them. Until now. You know what's the key component that activates the trigger mechanism to the puzzle? A handful of leaves. Mallow-sweet leaves to be more precise, but still. So you're telling me that Merlin, who's lived in the medieval era, decided to not only waste his time in designing puzzles that will be scattered all over the Highlands, but he also decided that the key to unlocking them would be a plant that's easy to grow and can most probably be found in nature? Are you telling me that, in the 400 years that followed after his death, those leaves were never carried by the wind and landed on one of those signs? Or that a fellow traveler didn't drop a few by accident while carrying them to his barn? Plus, a lot of the puzzles are either located next or inside of a settlement, meaning it's almost impossible that it didn't happen in a few of the hamlets. If that wasn't bad enough, these puzzles are related to the legendary wizard himself. Do you really think that no one would have investigated one of those relics that Merlin left behind and tried everything to figure it out? Historians dedicated to archiving his life's legacy would have spent eons trying different solutions, so why is it that only this lady was able to find the missing ingredient? Then, just to make the whole situation even more ridiculous, we complete the puzzle and she decides to pack her stuff and leave the Highlands altogether? Getting attacked and finding the solution to a single puzzle was too much excitement for her, so she gives up on her excursion, offers you her blessing to continue her life's work, and disappears into the void. If I had discovered the solution to one of life's few remaining mysteries, I would have invested all of my energy into finding everything that I could before getting ready to publish my findings. I wouldn't have just abandoned everything so that a random kid that I just met gets all the glory. That's just not how archaeology works. Plus, this then begs the question as to what she was even expecting when she decided to investigate her theory by herself in the middle of nowhere. Some hamlets literally have it in their town square, so why choose one that's all in the open and run the chance of getting attacked? Anyone who's played a Tomb Raider video game or seen one of the many Indiana Jones movies will know that the second you leave to explore some abandoned relic from a legendary individual, criminals are soon to follow. Obviously that never happens as the researcher abandons her quest. No enemies are ever found near the Merlin trial ever again, and we're now forced to be the only ones that care about the discovery. This quest spawns a ridiculous amount of icons on the map as we're asked to complete all of them to discover the reason why they were created in the first place. Surely, Merlin wouldn't have wasted his time creating 105 of them for no good reason. Let me repeat that just in case you misheard me. There are a total of 105 Merlin Trials, meaning that this is the most consuming side quest in the whole game. Oh, and fun fact, IGN stated in 2023 that there were a total of 95 of them, while I counted an additional 10 in both my playthroughs. Even without knowing what those challenges are, having 105 side activities of any type is way too much, so I don't blame the person for miscounting. Anyways, the trials are split into 9 different types of challenges. The first one, called Orb Towers, requires that you destroy orbs scattered around the area. If you miss one, you may always use Revelio to highlight the few that were eluding you. What I just described also applies to the challenge called Destructible Hinges, with the only two difference being that you're destroying sculptures instead of orbs, and that you now need the Confrigo spell to destroy them. Yay! Next is called the Magic Sphere, where you have to locate a cluster of orbs, use Revelio on them, and drag them to a predetermined area. Lumos Butterflies is exactly what it sounds like. You search the area for glowing butterflies. You then use Lumos to attract them as you lead them towards an inactive pillar. The butterflies then go in and light up said pillar. Do this 3 times and you're essentially done. Also, this is literally the same puzzle as the mirror puzzle found in Hogwarts, with the key difference being how you actually find them. Originally, you're given a screenshot that forces you to analyze the picture and guess where it might be in the surrounding area. For the Merlin Trial, however, you just have to look for a glowing light and head towards it. If anything, this is an obvious downgrade because the screenshots can be quite misleading. There are a few instances where I spent a considerable amount of time trying to figure out the exact location depicted in the picture, only to then give up because I was running in circles. It's challenging in all the right ways, as opposed to here where there is no challenge. You're just looking for a green cloud in the environment and then have to slowly walk back to one of the 3 pillars. Even lazier still would be the one dubbed the jumping challenge. All you have to do is run towards the next platform and press jump. There is no timer, no moving platforms, no complexity of any kind, and your character automatically grabs the ledge. This means that you'll only restart the run if you really, and I mean really, get unlucky. Hell, it takes longer to run back to the beginning of the challenge than it does to complete it. The only challenge which ironically fits the description is the one called Timed Brazers. The task requires that you light up 3 brazers with your Confringo spell, but every time you light one, it starts dropping towards the ground, forcing you to light the rest before they get extinguished. It becomes a matter of positioning as you need to figure out where all the 3 pillars are and how you can hit them with barely any break in between. It's really quite sad that in a game based around the limitless possibilities created by the use of magic, this was the hardest puzzle they could come up with. Just for the sake of transparency, here are the other Merlin Trials that the game has to offer. One of them requires that you use Reparo to fix some statues. Match 3 requires that you use the Flipendo spell to rotate the different pieces of a pillar, making all symbols identical across all sides. Finally, the last one is probably the one that makes the least sense. Stone Orb requires that you use the Pulso to push a huge sphere through the landscape, guiding it towards a platform that was clearly designed to hold it. The part that doesn't make any sense is that a lot of towns were built around them, so you're telling me that no one thought of putting 2 and 2 together? Why also doesn't anyone react when I'm pushing a huge death ball all over town? Why is no one commenting on the fact that the pergola just appeared in the middle of the market? Obviously, most people won't be thinking about all of this during their gaming session, but it's hard to deny that it cheapens the experience once you do realize it. Unlike the start of the game, which was full of surprises and memorable moments, here you have 105 puzzles that feel the same no matter their location. Once you know the specific spell you need for a specific puzzle, you'll automatically select the proper spell and use it in the exact same way every time. In a world filled with imagination and bigger-than-life moments, why does the main side offering feel like the least imaginative part of the experience? Quantity over quality, an unfortunate side effect of the game being an open world. Good games will find ways to repackage their repeating events in a way that makes them feel fresh and exciting. They might up the difficulty, or will combine mechanics that previously weren't, adding variety and complexity in the offering. Hogwarts Legacy never really attempts to change the recipe. You won't find enemies ready to ambush you, or some NPCs trying to solve the challenges. You'll also never use 2 spells in quick succession. You will always know what to expect, which means that if we combine this activity with the environmental traversal and the blandness of the world, it's impossible to not feel overwhelmed by the whole experience. This then brings me to one of the main reasons why the game doesn't encourage you to explore its open world beforehand, even if you unlock the Merlin Trials early on. The game has 23 spells and it uses those to gate the player's progress. The trials, when combining all 8 challenges, require a total of 6 different spells to complete. which means that when you unlock the trials, you won't have most of them, forcing you to constantly backtrack and get frustrated at your lack of interactivity. Even so, there is indeed a saving grace if you ever end up in this situation, even if it ends up being a double-edged sword. With the game having 23 spells to offer, you might be able to substitute one spell with another. Instead of using Wingardium Leviosa, for example, you might try using the basic Leviosa spell and see if you can make it work. Wingardium is the upgraded version of Leviosa, with the key difference being that it allows you to control the levitation of the object. You can therefore move it in all directions quite rapidly, meaning that you can rapidly place it where you need it with ease. Leviosa, on the other hand, only makes the object levitate at a predetermined height. Therefore, if you want to make it work, you could use a combination of the Accio, the Pulso, and your basic combat spells to move it into place before casting Leviosa. I find it quite remarkable that the only time the player is actually experimenting with spells is when he's trying to cheese the game. The devs never intended for you to play it this way. Every puzzle was made with a single spell in mind, meaning that having to learn 23 spells is less impressive when you realize that at least half of them are upgrades on pre-existing ones. For example, Accio pulls an object forward, while Depulso pushes it away. Descendo pushes the selected object downwards, while Flipendo makes the person go upwards in a rotating motion. These are 4 spells that, in my opinion, should have been combined because, as is, there's no tangible gameplay variety. Flipping an object backwards or forwards doesn't change anything, both in a combat and puzzle setting. Same thing happens with the other 2 spells. Pushing him forwards or backwards equally paralyzes the enemy, giving you enough time to remove most, if not all of its health, while recharging your spells, which I'll touch on later. Wouldn't it have been cooler if, with a flick of your thumbstick or mouse, you could have gotten a single spell that lets you control the direction of the casting? Imagine you select an enemy and, while your avatar executes the command, you input a direction in your peripheral. Moving the mouse or thumbstick backwards would make you execute Accio. Push forward and you get the Pulso. Pressing the thumbstick or left click on the mouse while rotating towards the left would cast Descendo. The right would be Flipendo. Stay still and you get Leviosa, which later on gets permanently replaced by Wingardium Leviosa. It would indeed require a lot more precision from the player, but in return, it would be exponentially more engaging than hitting a button and waiting for the in-game physics to execute the intended movement. Plus, by keeping them interchangeable in combat, messing up and casting the wrong spell wouldn't actually hinder your progress. All spells paralyze the enemy as is, and, during puzzle sequences, all spells already transform into Wingardium Leviosa once the object gets near your avatar. There's therefore no place for frustration to set in, and you would, in turn, gain a system that requires mastery from the player. I think that the reason they opted against this system, if it was ever considered to begin with that is because a similar thing already exists in both the Order of the Phoenix and the Half-Blood Prince video games. In those 2 games, the way that you move your joystick will determine the spell being cast. For example, to cast Reparo in the Order of the Phoenix, you have to select the broken item and rotate the right joystick in a clockwise fashion until the pieces magically morph back to the original shape. Wingardium Leviosa, on the other hand, requires that you alternate directions, creating a crescent as you rotate your controls left and right. Combat is also done in a similar way. Switching to the Half-Blood Prince, if you wish to disarm your opponent, all you have to do is tap both joysticks in opposite directions. Then, once he's down, finish him off by pushing the right stick upwards, casting the most overused spell in the whole franchise, Stupefy. This all sounds quite cool, and in a way it really is, but in reality, the system isn't precise enough to be an enjoyable experience. The game often either misreads your inputs or straight up ignores them entirely, forcing you to repeat the same movement consecutively to sway the game in your favor. That is, if you're doing them properly to begin with. In the Order of the Phoenix, Reparo and Stupefy require pretty much the same movement to execute. The game distinguishes both spells by the context surrounding the playable character. You won't be able to produce Reparo during a combat sequence, for example. Only harmful spells can be cast during a duel, so regardless if you're purposefully making a movement or not, you can always rest assured that you'll cast something relevant to the situation. However, from the player's perspective, it's often misleading because you'll mentally associate the movement to a specific spell. Most spells share this issue and, to make matters worse, you're taught a fair few of them in quick succession. It therefore feels overwhelming, encouraging you to scrap the whole thing and just commit to the 2-3 spells that left an impression. Although, to be fair to the Half-Blood Prince, I found the controls in that one more intuitive and less uniform, so if you do decide to pick one of these two games up, I would definitely recommend that you take the Half-Blood Prince version. Going back to Hogwarts Legacy, tying the spells to a press to activate system does avoid all pitfalls created by both predecessors and, let's face it, it's more representative of the current open world standards. However, this system isn't without its faults. It, by design, limits greatly the complexity of the gameplay, forcing the devs to instead concentrate on external stimuli only. If they instead opted for a hybrid system and merged the spells I previously mentioned while allowing the rest to be mapped onto your gaming peripherals, I think it would have made combat and puzzles a lot more engaging. It certainly would have helped differentiate its systems from other games while helping to cut back on the redundancy of the spells. Speaking of redundancy, Bombarda and Confringo are pretty much the same in practicality. You can even add Incendio into the mix, as it also creates an explosion and falls in the same spell category. However, once you upgrade it, it morphs into a crowd control spell, making it one of the rare instances where the spell changes its purpose when it gets stronger. Although, in the open world setting, all three options are interchangeable. Combat gets progressively easier, to the point that I rarely felt the need to switch spells to get an upper hand on the enemies, let alone pick a spell for its specific traits. All that to say that I absolutely loathe the Merlin Trials, and you know what's the best part? Can you even guess what the reward is for doing all 105 of them? Do you get like a unique set of clothes, or do you even get to maybe meet Merlin himself? Nope. They don't give you a single thing. The researcher never comes back, so you don't get the satisfaction of briefing her on your progress. It also doesn't unlock any unique dialogue options, and no one notices that there are now 105 new pergolas littering the landscape. Even worse, those Merlin silhouettes don't actually evolve. He doesn't suddenly appear in the last one, bringing with him a new form of ancient magic that's been lost to time. What you do indeed get is the same cutscene that you've seen 104 times before, with no resolution as to why both you and Merlin had to go through it all. The only two tangible rewards that you get for your troubles are more storage space for your gear and an achievement on your platform of choice. Words can't describe just how shitty it feels to just go through it all, let alone doing it twice for this video, so you're welcome, I guess. What also makes the whole thing worse is that, as much as I hate its inclusion into the game, I also can't deny that paradoxically, it's the one that had the most effort put into it. If we go back to the combat section in the challenge tab, all challenges require that you kill a certain amount of enemies to reap the rewards. This means that the combat mechanic becomes a means to end the extensive shopping list that the devs provided. You'll be going to bandit camps, which are marked on the map, to kill a variety of goblins and ashwinders. Famous foes, who are also supposedly stronger versions of a basic enemy type, are also marked on the map, removing any spontaneity from their encounters. The only enemies that are harder to collect are, ironically enough, the ones that aren't as obviously marked on your map. Inferi only spawn if you're either in a tomb or a cemetery, or if an Ashwinder assassin makes one appear. They are rare, which means that your instinct will be to farm them when you get the chance. The saving grace is that you only need to kill 66 of them to complete that section of the chart. Finally, trolls are even rarer because they're restricted to their little battle areas. Once you've found one of those locations, you'll be coming back periodically just to see if they respawn and can reap the rewards. The side effect of this system is that, because enemies are treated like a collectible, you'll start treating them as such too, and will be avoiding those that you've completed a requirement. I've often ended up avoiding wolf and spider encounters just because they had nothing to offer me. I mean, why would I waste my time fighting the same enemy over and over again when the satisfaction of defeating them disappeared long before the challenge was completed? What does partially help alleviate this situation is that many of them drop crafting resources once defeated, which in turn allows you to craft potions. Inferi drop their skulls, which are used in making the Thunderbrew potion. Wolves lose their hides, and trolls offer their boogers like in the first movie. On the other hand, by completing the challenges, you'll also get most, if not all, the resources that you need, so this isn't as much of a defense as it first seems. The last two challenges in the open world can be found in the Exploration tab, and those are find the astronomy tables and solve Hogwarts secrets. The first one is a mini-game where you have to align the stars with the lines on screen, creating the intended constellation in the process. The last one is the only exclusive challenge set in the Hogwarts castle, so I'll cover it when I get back to the famous monument. Finally, there are also 2 more challenges that you can do in the open world which, ironically enough, aren't even followed by the challenge tab for some reason. The first one requires that you follow the butterflies until they arrive at their destination and unravel a chest. Little side note, if you ever decide to 100% this game and you realize that you're missing some decorations, even if the whole map has been cleared, this is most probably the activity that you haven't completed. The butterfly icon only appears on the map when you get near it, meaning that you'll only know which ones you're missing by randomly traversing the map and hoping for the best. Quite odd, considering that the game purposefully marks everything and anything that's mildly relevant, so why there's a discrepancy for the 15 butterfly quests is beyond me. The final activity is the battle arenas, which require that you survive waves of enemies until you collected your reward. If you remove the arena battles and examine the rest, you can see how the game is actually a collectathon in disguise. If you accumulate all the kills required to complete the 2 sections, you would need a total of 240 Dark Wizards, 35 Duckbots, 190 Goblins, 66 Infurries, 240 Spiders, 21 Infamous Foes, with each having an icon on the map, and more. To complete those, you'll be mostly putting a waypoint on the map and flying straight to the dungeon, bandit camp, or spider lair, killing everyone that spawns at your arrival. Next comes the Exploration tab, which requires that you collect 20 ancient magic traces, pop 32 rows of balloons, land on 20 circular platforms, complete 52 out of 105 Merlin Trials, complete 15 astronomy tables, and, finally, solve the 3 Hogwarts secrets. Add in also the field pages for the book, which are 28 for the Highlands, 50 for Hogsmeade, and 100 for Hogwarts, and you can immediately see how it becomes tedious the more you play. This also isn't limited to the Challenges tab either, as the Collectathon tab holds other categories like the individual clothes and wand parts you've collected, as well as the glossary with all the enemy types that you've defeated, all the animals you've saved, and so much more. It starts feeling less like a video game and more like a second full-time job. To sum up everything that we've seen so far, the game has nothing to distract you from all the tasks that it has to offer. It has a ridiculous amount of things to collect, but mainly no context for collecting them. Most of the time, you won't find any lore or interesting facts along the way. Most bandit camps, for example, don't have any documents to read, and the rare times that they do is generic text that won't captivate anyone. Just to prove the scarcity of the notes, what you see on screen is the interactable world map found in the Hogwarts Legacy Wiki. If you remove all the icons and only select the option that makes all the notes appear, you can see that it's far from substantial. There are a total of 16 notes to be found in the open world, which is minuscule for a map of this size, let alone a universe as captivating as this one. This is then made even more obvious just by adding the location of bandit camps and the main locations. For contrast, if we examine the maps of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which has 10 different zones to explore, England alone contains 48 documents out of the 130 to collect and read. This is just one of the many reasons why all the game's activities feel like busy work. You don't learn anything that pushes the plot forward, let alone something that adds to the immersion because the devs didn't feel the need or had the time to add it. This deja vu feeling is also made worse when you consider the effect that the method of transportation has on the game. Add in also the repetitive nature of the landscape and the lack of long-term memorable landmarks, and it's easy to feel as if the game is worse than most modern open world games. Do you know what the cherry on this multi-layered disappointment cake is? It's not the Merlin Trials or the repetitiveness of the experience. It's the fact that the devs did all of this on purpose. If you return to the art book and read the 3 pages found under the title Extracurricular Activities, pages 184 to 186 respectively, you will learn that the devs wanted to create small and simple experiences that didn't ask too much of the player. The dungeon design lead, Andrew Hayes, has this to say on the matter. I feel like the world is full of little touches, small embellishments of magic tucked into every corner. Some puzzles can surprise and delight with just the simplest premise. Using magic to open a door with the pulso or levitating a crate can be a puzzle. It gets the brain going without having to present itself as a contrived experience. Sometimes, the best puzzles are the one that the player doesn't even view as a puzzle, they just view it as exploring the wizarding world with magic. To me, this means that they kept everything as basic as possible because they were looking for a higher level of authenticity. In a way, I can definitely understand because you would, indeed, expect to see bandit camps filled with enemies for you to kill and puzzles that aren't complex by themselves. Simplicity is definitely appreciated, and it's often the simplest things that are the most memorable, even outside of the gaming landscape. The problem here is that they went so far in that direction that they ended up killing the joy from taking part in the activities. Worst is, that was also part of the design. When talking specifically about the Merlin Trials, the mission design lead, Kelly Murphy, stated that the team wanted a set of micro-puzzles in the Highlands that reinforced spell usage and took very little narrative to propagate outward. These started as Sphinx puzzles, but ultimately, that lore fell out of place in Scotland and harder to explain than putting the concept behind Merlin. The team felt the famous wizard was easier to get across to the player. End of quote. To me, that means that the devs wanted something easy to copy-paste and that wasn't that difficult to integrate in the game's lore. They chose Merlin because he was already established in both the Harry Potter universe and in other pop culture movies and books. The puzzles were also made simple because they didn't want them to feel like puzzles. They wanted the player to breeze through them because they thought that the player would be more immersed in the experience instead of being reminded that he's playing a proper video game, which is extremely ironic in hindsight. All in all, I think that it starts to explain why everyone that I've talked to refuses to play this game, let alone finish it. The devs had the movies and books to use as references, and that worked wonders for starting the game. However, when it came to creating the main offering, they found it extremely barren, lacking references and inspiration from the source material. This is also made immediately apparent when you count the number of pages in the art book that were dedicated to each location. There are a total of 105 pages dedicated to everything surrounding Hogwarts. Full disclaimer, I do want to stress that these pages often deviate and talk about broader things that aren't necessarily related to it, but as they rapidly bring their focus back to Hogwarts and explain how that aspect fits into making it more authentic, I decided to include them in as they add context to the pages preceding it. Moving on, there are a total of 33 pages dedicated to Hogsmeade and its merchants. Finally, and most surprisingly still, there are only 12 pages dedicated to the entirety of the Highlands, and subsequently the open world. Let me put that into perspective. 138 pages were dedicated to the main 2 hubs that encapsulate the first 12 hours of the game. This is also the segment that follows the movies quite closely, and that sold the game to the general public. The rest of the game, which, to the very least, triples the amount of hours required to fully complete it, only has enough content to cover 12 pages in the book. Also, for the sake of transparency, these numbers don't include the pages covering the rumor requirement and its mechanics, as it's the only pages that fit in both camps at the same time. You'll see why that is when we get there. This to me is the dead giveaway as to why the game feels like a blatant bait and switch. Even the devs knew that they had nothing to say about this portion, so they just set the minimum that they could get away with and then moved on to something else. It's really discouraging considering that, in a world that's brimming with potential, none of it really feels magical in the world that's ironically made of magic. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking at this point. Jovy, why are you complaining about the map design when clearly the devs intended for you to spend most of your time in the Hamlets and doing a bunch of side quests? I mean, it was a highlight during the game's marketing push and, logically, the destination would make most of it, if not the whole thing, worth it, right? Well, my friend, I'm glad you asked because it definitely does feel that way. until you stop to scrutinize every little detail like we've done so far in the video. On your first few visits to the Hamlets, you'll be hypnotized by the graphics and by the sheer fact that you're playing a game set in the Hogwarts universe. The game does look really good, and I won't deny that the first few interactions did make me excited for what else the game had in store. However, issues rapidly start to appear when you take the time to slow down and examine all aspects that help grow your level of disbelief. If we go back to the first Hamlet we visited together, we can see that, depending on how I position myself, the sound cue won't appear as they're supposed to. In this case, I'm looking at two guys talking, but all I can hear is a random guy snoring? Maybe it's supposed to be a clogged nose? Not really sure, to be honest. Anyways, if we get closer, we can finally hear what both guys are talking about, so let's take a minute to eavesdrop on their conversation.
My friend wants to find more Dugbogs now that one's been captured. Absurd. Simply absurd.
If there was one wild Dugbog out there, certainly more are wandering about. When the forest calls, I must take heed.
Pitterbon Ford has the finest bridges in the forest.
Gromlet Gaunt was the sort who'd flay her own mother.
I question anyone teaching defense against dark arts. Why take such an interest?
Well, if it's not one thing, it's the other.
Unicorn blood will keep you alive, certainly. But at what cost?
As you can see, there's barely any correlation between what is said and what is actually being answered by the other NPC. Do you know that this also isn't a contained situation? If you ever slow down and listen to any ongoing discussion, regardless if it's in Hogwarts or in the Highlands, you'll see that the same lack of coordination appears consistently no matter where you are. I honestly don't get why they decided to make it this way, when it would have been so much better to record multiple dialogue exchanges in the studio and then put them on in rotation. That way, it would indeed repeat after a while, but, at the very least, it wouldn't sound like someone chopped off bits of lines and created a new set of dialogue exchanges. If you thought that it couldn't get any worse, look how far I need to go before I can no longer hear the two individuals talking.
I question anyone teaching defense against dark arts. Why take such an interest?
Quite lame indeed. The other aspect that cheapens exploration is that most houses are locked, requiring that you learn the Alohomora spell to gain access. Let's deviate for a few minutes and talk about that side quest, as its inclusion helps redefine the way that we explore the map and subsequently the open world. After you completed the first trial given to you by the wizard in the map chamber, you'll receive an owl message from the caretaker of Hogwarts. As this game is based in the era before Argus Fitch, the caretaker this time is a man called Gladwin Moon. He's seeking our help because, when he last visited Hogsmeade, he encountered a Boggart that transferred into its greatest fear, a small creature known as a Demigeist. For those that aren't aware, those sloth lookalikes have the ability to simultaneously turn invisible and predict the future, making them extremely sought after by all wizard kind. However, after encountering one in Korea, which scared the bejeebus out of him, they became the species he fears the most. Well, someone decided to use that info and create a total of 30 Demigeist statues, which were randomly placed all over the map, with 10 of them located in Hogwarts alone. Plus, as the caretaker's last name is Moon, the perpetrator decided to include it in his design as an inside joke with the victim. Normally, a typical human being would shiver at the sight of something they disliked and move on, but not him. He's willing to teach you how to commit the very illegal act of breaking and entering, only as a means to alleviate his discomfort. I hope that this isn't one of those morals that the devs wanted to teach the player, because the logic here is flawed to the very least. There are essentially two things that make this spell unique, with the first one being that this is the only spell that has its own minigame. Every single lock you interact with forces you to take part in an extremely basic minigame that makes even the pipe puzzle in Bioshock 1 seem like advanced algebra. All you have to do is move both thumbsticks on your controller in a circular fashion until you see one of those two sets of gears light up and turn clockwise. Then, you hold the position with the thumbstick that's connected to that set of gears and repeat the same process with the other thumbstick. Sounds monotonous enough, and it definitely is, especially when you take into consideration that all locked doors and chests have the same minigame. Which means that, unlike all other spells, which are spontaneous and immediately rewarding, this one will annoy the hell out of you because it breaks the flow of the action every time you encounter a lock. This then leads me to the second reason that makes this spell comparatively unique from the rest. It's the only spell that has 3 different levels of efficiency. Earlier in the video, I complained that your avatar masters all spells immediately upon learning them, and that the only sense of progression comes from putting a single perk in the talent tree. This time, however, you have 3 levels to learn, and the only way to learn them is by bringing back a specific quantity of demiguise statues to Gladwin. In other words, they made the game even more grindy because you'll often find a locked door which you can't open, and unlike all other collectibles, this one has a direct effect on the way that you'll be playing the game. This means that, unlike all other collectibles which are easily ignorable, you're forced to take part in this one if you want to get the most out of the open world. Oh, and if you thought that the spell got harder with every subsequent level, you'd be sorely mistaken. It never evolves, meaning this minigame was specifically created to pan out the runtime. No effort was put into making it feasible in the world. They just created an RPG requirement and proceeded to put level 2 and 3 doors all over the map. Luckily for us, the quest that kickstarts this mess is actually fun. On top of it unlocking the only locked area on Hogwarts, it also forces us to stealth around it as we're after curfew. I wonder how Gladwin even got hired, because this guy simply doesn't care. Mind you, the curfew situation never repeats itself, and coming back to this area after hours on a subsequent day doesn't trigger any patrols or penalties. But, as a bite-sized experience, it's a welcome change of pace. This is also where you can find the last 3 Daedalic keys that you need for your house chest, which I'll also touch on later. After you found both spells, you're then left to your own devices and forced to find 9 more statues before he accepts to teach you the next level of the spell, with another 13 later on if you want to unlock the final level. Do note that, in total, we have to find 20 statues just to finish this quest, with an optional 10 more to find if you're a completionist and want the achievement. Also, if you may recall, we've already found one earlier in the video, which means that you'll spend a lot of time trying to remember where you even encountered one to begin with. Then, just to make matters even more annoying, you also have to get lucky when searching for them, as some are found behind locked doors. In Hogwarts, for example, 3 of them can be found behind a level 2 lock, meaning that you might spend a lot of time searching for one, only to realize that it was all in vain. And then you'll forget about it because you moved on to the Highlands, and then you can't find that specific door anymore. Honestly, I would recommend that you just go online and follow a guide. Most houses in a hamlet have a level 2 or 3 lock, which disincentivizes you to search for the statues. They can also be hard to find, and the boredom is only complemented by the unnecessary backtracking that it creates. Also, before we head back to the hamlets, I just want to confirm that this is yet another instance where the game doesn't reward you properly for completing the quest. Once you've found the required amount of demiguises, you'll receive an owl from the culprit urging you to stop meddling in his scheme. Turns out that the offender was a guy called Piers Pemberton. He's an old classmate of Gladwin and one that was bullied by him when they attended Hogwarts. Years later, he sees Gladwin in Hogsmeade and decides that he's waited long enough to get some payback. So, he decides to place a boggart in front of Gladwin and uses his fear to make the statues. Now that you've found him, however, you can take the time to rectify the situation. Regardless of the chosen dialogue options, you convince him that acting this way makes him as bad as Gladwin and that the only way to win would be to let go of the past. We then head back to Gladwin to share with him the good news, but it turns out that he's not as good of a person.
It was an old schoolmate of yours, Piers Pemberton.
Oh, I might have known. Pigtails Piers.
I don't think he likes being called that.
Of course he does. Oh, he had such flowing locks. We used to laugh about them. I laughed the hardest of all. Clever, clever man. I'd no idea he was so devious. I must go and congratulate him. Whatever statues remain seem less terrifying now that I know they were put out by old pigtails. Continue collecting them if you like. As for me, I'm going to go and pay a visit to my old friend.
For some odd reason, our character doesn't feel a conviction this time to make things right. No matter what we answer, he just keeps the hate going before proceeding to pay him a visit. The quest ends here, and if you do decide to find the remaining demiguise statues, you will get an achievement for it, but won't be able to reassure Gladwin of that fact. Actually, he disappears from the game entirely, quarantining himself inside his living quarters for the rest of the game. This is therefore another instance where a character was solely created for the purpose of introducing a fetch quest. Lastly, this dialogue exchange also presents a problem that most of the game has, which is that once Piers diminishes Gladwin's job by calling it
a lowly caretaker,
we then get the option to agree with him, insulting Gladwin in his line of work further. The problem is that the game never did any legwork to make us care for him. We know nothing about Mr. Moon other than his job and his fear for demiguises. Therefore, when the game wants to pay off our emotional investment towards him, we couldn't care less because he's related to such a shitty fetch quest. Plus, with the revelation that he used to be a bully, you might be more inclined to agree with a delinquent, reflecting your hate for the quest and not the character, which in turn makes you a bully as well. Now that we've learned all 3 levels of Alohomora, we can continue exploring the Hamlets without restrictions, which is where the major issues start to appear. For example, no one cares that we're breaking into places, even if it's literally happening next to them. You could be unlocking a door next to 2 people drinking, and no one will care that you're breaking in and raiding the place. Same happens when you encounter people inside the houses. They don't care that you've broken into their home and have been stealing all of their life savings. This is yet another instance where the game desperately needed a karma system. Nothing you do affects the townfolk. They're just mindless husks executing an algorithm, and I can prove it. After raiding a bunch of houses at night, I realized that most of them were empty. I found that fact very peculiar, as you would naturally assume that the devs programmed the NPCs to complete a random task during the day and take shelter in a predetermined home at night. So I decided to follow a group of NPCs that spent the day watching a random witch paint something that, on closer inspection, wasn't actually the surrounding landscape. They randomly programmed her to sit there and paint a landscape that looked similar, but ultimately wasn't the one that she was looking at, which removes some of the immersion in my opinion. Regardless, after taking a nap next to them, the NPCs got up and started walking. And walking. Until I soon realized that, instead of walking towards the center of town, as you might have expected, they were actually walking away from it, which really puzzled me. Fast forward the journey to the end, and this is what happens. They simply despawn once they arrive at a certain threshold, which is really dumb. Also, if you go back to the starting location and rest, you'll see them respawning the area without walking to get there. In other words, they literally appear, get blisters from sitting the whole day until they get the cue to leave and disappear. Obviously, this intrigued me even more, so I searched far and wide for other oddities that I can find in the world. There's a house where I found 2 ladies spending time in the living room, and, as I wanted to test the script for those already inside the house, I decided to repeat the process and see how it went. Turns out that, same as the first test subjects, they also vanish from existence. Also, if you try to deviate them from their path, they just bounce back as if they're magnetized to something on the road. I then decided to go back to the same house and see if the same characters would spawn in the house once the nighttime had arrived. To my surprise, it actually wasn't the case. It seems that there will always be 2 NPCs in the house at night, but both their actions and their appearance will vary depending on the executed script. This time, however, there was a person downstairs and a random man sitting on the bed on the 2nd floor. I then moved time forward, and this is what I discovered. Yep, he just moonwalks like this for the rest of the day. Or until I get bored and decide to interact with him, which ends up like this. I then went outside and wondered how the field workers appeared in the world, and, to no one's surprise, their script matches everyone else's. One other situation that I encountered was this instance where I aggroed a few enemies, and the NPCs ignored both me and the enemies in favor of continuing their scripted dialogue. I can go on and on, but the point is that, after visiting a few hamlets, you'll rapidly realize how brain damaged everyone is. No one will be flying on their brooms, and rarely will we see anyone using magic. Those that are essentially repeating the same actions over and over again until night comes and they're forced to leave for their death march. This also means that there's nothing for you to interact with other than the only merchant in town and the many locked doors that protect the many chests that only need to be opened. That's one of the main reasons why creating an open world game can be extremely hard to properly execute. When done right, it feels like a universe that's plausible enough to warrant a high level of disbelief from the player. When done poorly, it feels more like what it actually is. A simulation programmed by a bunch of talented but ultimately underpaid staff that did their best with the cards that were dealt to them. This feeling of disappointment is also prevalent when examining the side quests that the open world has to offer. Most, if not all of them, end up feeling like a bunch of fetch quests. Kidnapped Cabbage asks us to track down a bunch of stolen Chinese cabbages and deliver the goods to the client. You do end up fighting a bunch of goblins along the way, so it does add some variety in a quest that's simple by design. The Lost Astrolabe quest requires that we help a student retrieve her lost heirloom from the bottom of the lake. Although, because she promised her family to never set foot in its dark waters, we're then forced to swim down multiple predetermined areas before we can find the heirloom. Very boring and repetitive. Moving on, Absconder Encounter is probably one of the most fun fetch quests in the game because there's an unexpected boss located at the end of it. I was also a few levels lower than the Arachnid, so fighting it proved to be more challenging than all other encounters in the game thus far. However, even this encounter wasn't enough to save this quest, as the goal was, once more, to pick up an heirloom and bring it back to the requester. Spot removal is a quest that stuck with me because, unlike a lot of quests where the devs try to invent a reason why we specifically have to complete the quest, this one doesn't even attempt it. The girl straight up tells us that she doesn't feel like picking up the items herself before sending us off to fetch some items in the Forbidden Forest.
I'd go myself, but I don't want to. I only need a few booba-tubers, but they grow wild, so you'll have to look around.
Granted, this does play off on her posh personality, so I do understand why the devs went for it. However, in the grand scheme of things, I had completed an exuberant amount of fetch quests by this point that my goodwill was mostly inexistent. It just seemed like they had run out of ideas and decided to not hide it and play it off on a technicality. For contrast, I remember when I was so overwhelmed by the amount of copy-pasted quest designs during my first playthrough that when I was asked to not be a delivery boy, but to become an executioner of, in this case, a troll, I felt the need to record it. To be clear, this quest really wasn't that special. All you need to do is go to the specific location, kill the troll, and then head back to the quest giver, letting them know that the deed is done. The reason that I found it so memorable is that I spent so much time being a courier that I felt like the game should have actually been called Uber Legacy, the magic of on-time deliveries. At a certain point, it felt like I was running in a never-ending loop. It was quest after quest after quest of people asking for something to be brought back to them that I ended up lacking motivation to continue playing the game. This lack of stimuli left me starving for diversity of any kind, so when I was offered a quest that remotely stood out from the group, I savored every moment of it. That's not to say that all the side quests require that you pick something up and bring it back to the requester. There are a few variables, like the treasure maps, which are surprisingly hard to complete. At their core, it's always the same thing really. Look at a drawn map and compare it to the open world map so that you may figure out where it might possibly be. Then, you get on location, complete the puzzle there, and move on. The challenge is to find similarities in the map that's really huge with one that's extremely precise. However, the real problem with those is that, other than the one we saw in Hogwarts and the Bell Tower puzzle from before, they're really all lame and straightforward. Once you understand their gimmick and accept that the only loot in the game is different set of clothes, you'll end up following a guide just to speed through them. Still, once in what feels like a decade of grinding, the game offers you a quest that actually feels like effort was put into it. Take the quest called The Tale of Roland Oakes. It starts off like many others. A student by the name of Adeline Oakes is worried about her uncle Roland. He's a metal trader who has strong ties with the goblin community. Usually, he sends her an owl every week to keep her informed on his whereabouts, but since his last letter that mentions a deal with the Randrock loyalists, he's been radio silent. She therefore asks us to investigate, meaning it's our job to rescue him and bring him back. On paper, this sounds like a multi-layered fetch quest. We're not just picking him up and bringing him back this time, however. We also have to potentially break him out of jail and go wands blazing like some John Wick fanfiction. Well, it turns out that it's actually more interesting than that, as once we get there and kill all the goblins, we realize that he's actually not there. All we have to guide us is a map, which makes it one of the only side quests that combine both quest types. Then, once we found the location, we realize that he's been held inside an ancient vault, requiring that we kill some more loyalists before we find his cell. Good news is that he's indeed held in a random cell, so the map was indeed leading us to the proper location. Bad news is that the door is enchanted and, somehow, only he can break the spell once his wand is returned to him. We then search for it, only to discover that it's being held captive by a boss. Unfortunately for said boss, enemies don't level scale, so beating ruffians that are 10 levels lower than the player is an absolute joke. Once the whole ordeal is done, we collect the item and give it back to its rightful owner. He then removes the enchantment, leaves the cell, and thanks us for the assistance as he disappears from the face of the earth. Better still, I don't have to go back and tell Adeline that the deed is done. The quest ends here, feeling instantly rewarding and a welcome change of pace. Other quests are memorable because they feel like they came straight out of a Harry Potter movie. Rescuing Rococo requires that you save a shopkeeper's best friend, Rococo the Niffler. She last saw him near some ruins and presumed he entered inside as, rumor has it, it held the treasure of a dangerous wizard. Niffler, naturally attracted to anything shiny, couldn't resist the call and went for the treats that were held inside. We therefore follow the map marker and head inside as well, and full disclosure, I had already raided the ruin before I accepted this quest. Turns out that a treasure quest called The Hippogriff Marks the Spot requires that you raid the place and complete a hidden puzzle, revealing an obscure room which contains a rare piece of clothing. Therefore, when I went back there for this new quest, all the puzzles were already completed and I was able to breeze through it effortlessly. Even so, I do remember when I completed the quest on my first playthrough. I had the treasure quest in my to-do list, but I didn't figure out where I had to go. When I got this quest, it was kind of a revelation for me. I recognized the statue, so I had the thrill of figuring it out, only to then continue my original quest and follow the trail of money that the Niffler left behind. It's pretty basic in execution, but it works well and there's enough to do that it never gets boring. If you're not annihilating the competition, you're figuring out a traversal puzzle similar to this one, which is rarely if ever repeated for some reason. If you walk on the tiles, the wall absorbs you and throws you outside the area. Initially, I thought that all we had to do was to throw an item on it, triggering the mechanism and allowing you to proceed unharmed. However, I later on realized that the item I used to activate the trap didn't respawn, so I had no choice but to think of an alternative. In the end, the solution was deceptively simple. All he had to do is use the spell Arresto Momentum on it before proceeding over it. Pretty cool, and one of the rare instances where I actually had to use my brain to find a solution, which, as you might imagine, is quite a rare occurrence. Then, once we've unlocked the final door by figuring out that this random wall was actually a hidden door to a random room that held the last item we needed, we enter the final chamber and pull the Niffler into our bag. We then head back to the shopkeeper and get to choose between giving her back the Niffler or keeping it for ourselves. I decided to return her lost friend to her, but in another quest where I did the opposite, I was able to get the scripted reward and keep the creature, making it one of the only quests where choosing the evil option actually gave us some extra loot. What shocks me the most of those two quests is that, no matter how you look at them, they're pretty standard when compared to other similar titles. It uses its context to build a bite-sized narrative, which in turn forces you to take part in the game's basic mechanics. Finally, I kept the best and subsequently the most controversial quest for last. It's called Mind Your Own Business, and it starts with us offering our assistance to a never-before-seen character called Penny the House Elf. However, our expectations are immediately subverted as, for the first and only time in the game, she actually doesn't require any help in the typical sense of the word. You see, Penny's current owner is interested in selling her antique shop, and if we decide to buy the place, we would not only gain a roof over our heads in downtown Hogsmeade, but would also become Penny's new proud owner.
You'll be able to give Penny almost anything that you want to sell. It will be no work at all for you once the shop is up and running. If you want the shop and Penny hopes that you do, you should talk to Penny's mistress as soon as you can. Her name is Cassandra Mason.
Why is your mistress selling the shop? And you?
Penny cannot be certain as Mistress Mason so rarely confides in her. However, she repeatedly mentions how tired she has become of trying to let the shop. She has had rotten bad luck with the last few tenants.
Are you all right? Are you holding your breath?
Penny's fine. Sometimes Penny simply needs to remind herself to stop talking.
Intriguing to say the least, right? At least she's less annoying than Dobby with her self-degradation. Here, it's just really cute. Still, my curiosity is absolutely killing me. So let's go and see how much Cassandra is asking for the property.
Tell you what, I shall sell you the space for an exceedingly fair price. I think you might just be shrewd enough to make a go of it.
An exceedingly fair price for a shop and an elf. What's the catch?
You are wise to be wary in business dealings. No catch, really. I simply ask that you allow me to do you the favour of buying the shop back, at a discount, of course, should your efforts fail. The last thing we need here in Hogsmeade is for one bad apple to spoil the barrel, if you get my meaning.
Your faith in me is overwhelming. You're sorely mistaken if you think I'm going to fail.
There's that confidence again. And, of course, I wish you every success. Do we have a deal?
Man, this deal is getting sketchier by the minute. I love it. How much is she even willing to sell us the place? What? She's only asking for 1,500 gold coins. That's like spare change when compared to what I currently have. Like I've stated before, the game does a poor job of creating an enticing economy, so you'll rapidly accumulate riches that rival those of our favorite young wizard. In this case, however, the truth is actually the opposite. This is actually my leftover money after I've already bought every blueprint and every Wander Broom decal in the game. It's impossible to end up broke, and I'll touch on that later. For now, we accept the offer and head towards our new business. As we're leaving, the old lady stops us and asks that, while we're cleaning the place, we should keep an eye out for a chest that contains the personal belongings of her late husband. Since his passing, she wasn't able to summon the strength to go back and collect his stuff. As an act of kindness, she asked that we make the time to bring his stuff to her before opening the shop. This all sounds fishy to me, but honestly, I just don't care. I didn't really consider how cool it would be to own a shop in Hogsmeade until now, so even if it ends up being a trap, I'm sure that the strongest protege of the land could easily take care of it. This is gonna be so cool. Well, she did say that the place needed some love. No matter. Nothing I can't fix with a quick flick of the wrist.
Mistress Mason wanted Penny to be sure and give you this key. It opens a chest in the back room of this shop.
Oh yes, she mentioned it to me. It contains some of her late husband's belongings.
Penny wonders if you should open the chest.
Are you holding your breath again?
Penny must get back to work now.
It's official. Penny is the most adorable character in the game. Definitely waifu material. Now, all that's left is for us to conquer whatever waits for us inside so we can live happily ever after. What awaits us is far from what I think most people were expecting. You see, it doesn't take long for us to discover the sinister plot that's at play. The dungeon that we find ourselves in ends up being the domain of a poltergeist called Fastidio. He made a deal with Cassandra where she would keep sending investors into his lair so that he may force them to complete some form of rite of passage. The idea comes in two folds. On surface level, Fastidio states that his goal is to make the owner complete a set of predetermined challenges so that, if he succeeds, he'll be worthy of not only his freedom in the shop, but also a binding contract between both parties. Look deeper, however, and it rapidly becomes apparent that Fastidio's actually motivated by an ever-bearing sense of loneliness that feeds into his affliction for mischief. He throws objects your way, hurting and distracting you during your venture into the labyrinthian maze that represents his home. He also attempts to terrify you, stalking you with an army of hostile mannequins. Every time you make progress, he adds a roadblock, forcing you to complete a bunch of slightly tedious puzzles just to earn the right to move forward. Your agony is his source of pleasure, and as all subjects before us lost their sanity, so did the idea of them ever escaping this wretched place. In the end, this nightmare fulfills the need of both parties perfectly. Fastidio gains a new plaything, quenching temporarily his everlasting thirst for comfort, while Cassandra gets to keep her deposit and sucker in another buyer. It's the perfect crime, and it's one that Cassandra has been able to get away with. Until now. As for the gameplay side of things, this is exactly the change of pace that the game needed. The dungeon rapidly morphs into a beautiful gothic mansion. Shadows swallow everything around you, creating a sense of unease as you're left wondering if something is waiting for you just around the corner. Cobwebs contrast with the dreaded scenery, shaping the space while unsettling the player further. It reminds me a lot of another game I covered in this channel called Layers of Fear. Similar as in that game, the layout stretches and morphs right before your eyes, bending reality in a way that can only be described as pure madness. It's hauntingly alluring and eerie. Not counting the Hufflepuff exclusive quest, this is the only quest in the core game that's going for this kind of tone. It's an amazing experience, and it's one that I would definitely recommend if you do decide to pick this game up. That is, as long as you're able to go over its few glaring flaws. Going from the least offensive to downright insulting, this quest adds two new enemy types, the mannequin and a unique end boss called Fastidio's Monster. Sounds refreshing in theory, but in practice, they're both reskins of enemies that already existed in the base game. Mannequins inherit the animations of the Inferi, while the boss behaves identically to the trolls. Nothing was added and none of the animations are offset or altered. That being said, the reason this isn't a deal breaker is because, unlike all other enemies in the game, these aren't repeated elsewhere and subsequently complement the enchanting environment quite well. The quest also doesn't prioritize combat, but instead values exploration and puzzle solving. This means that combat is used more as a pacing mechanism and less as a tangible challenge, which, at this point, is a welcome change. Speaking of challenges, the devs created one unique gimmick for this quest and proceeded to reiterate on it every so often. More precisely, you'll be using lanterns to both light up your surroundings and activate a few switches. Those then either unlock a door somewhere or make a section of the floor disappear, guiding the player to the next objective. Overall, it's a very simple and effective puzzle. It adds to the atmosphere and is different enough from the rest of the game that it feels fresh and engaging. But, for reasons I can only guess have to do with padding, the devs felt the need to implement it at every chance that they got. It saturates the gameplay and outstays as welcome after the third or fourth time. It sours it enough for me that, thinking back at it, I'm not too keen on ever replaying it. It feels too long for its own good, which is quite possible as this segment lasts about 35 minutes in real time, making it already one, if not the longest quest in the whole game. In spite of all that, those two negatives pale in comparison to the last issue, but before we can get to it, we first have to escape this hellhole and get our revenge. As mentioned at the start of this segment, the Poltergeist offers us a partnership of sorts after we've conquered all challenges and defeated his champion. Once done, his suggestion is that if we let him hunt the store once a month, he will let us both leave his domain and tend to the store undisturbed. We happily accept those terms on the condition that he only comes out after 9 PM as to not affect the overall reputation of the store. Fastidio counters that offer by requesting that we bump his poltergeist activity to 2 days a month, which we gladly accept before exiting the area. Once back at the shop, we immediately question Penny, but rapidly learn that, like all other elves in this universe, her enslavement forced her to follow orders and play her part, regardless of how she felt about it. From there, we head outside and warn the Aura we met before and ask her to join us in our quest for justice. In typical gaming fashion, the Aura starts questioning Cassandra, which in turn leaves her guard open for a surprise attack. This knocks her unconscious for the remainder of the conflict, leaving us to defend both our honors. As you can probably predict, this battle is a total cakewalk. Ancient Magic removes a huge portion of her health, and if it wasn't for the fact that the devs segmented the battle, which forces a position reset, she wouldn't have been able to cancel any of my stun attacks. Even with the added padding, the battle only lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds. It's the perfect humiliation for someone this pathetic, and as the Aura wakes up just in time to magically handcuff her, we get the satisfaction of putting a criminal behind bars and reap our reward. We head back to the shop and share the good news with our friend Penny. Interestingly enough, we get an option that I didn't expect. We can actually free her by giving her a hat that we uncovered earlier in the dungeon. However, unlike Dobby, where the choice of doing so is extremely straightforward and contains zero negative repercussions, here it's a heartbreaking one. On one hand, if she left, she would have her freedom but wouldn't have anywhere to go. We have no reason to believe that she has any family or anything really worth living for other than the shop, so it's entirely possible that she might end up back in the same position, potentially serving a worser owner. On the other hand, I can guarantee that by keeping her by my side, I'll be able to protect her, shelter her, tend to her needs while giving her a purpose. She really seemed happy with the prospect of tending the store, so I couldn't imagine a better person fit for the job. I therefore decide to keep her under my wing and, as a cool add-on, I get to choose the new name for the shop. Unfortunately, you only get to choose between 3 predetermined names, but it does the job nonetheless. A new sign towers over the frontal facade of our new business, and, just before the quest ends, we instruct Penny to close the store every day by 9 PM, sucker punching Fastidio back into the loneliness that he so desperately wanted to evade. Actually, now that I think about it, this makes the situation worse because we won't be tricking unsuspecting people into entering his domain. He will remain alone for the rest of his days, or until he rage quits and wrecks the place. Only time will tell, but for now, we can just enjoy how cartoonishly evil it all played out. Now that the quest is done, you might be wondering what was that controversial thing I kept insinuating throughout the video, and the answer is quite simple. This quest wasn't included in the base game. You heard me right, the best quest in the game was surgically removed so that PlayStation had an exclusive day 1 quest with every pre-order. That means that as someone that originally bought it on Steam, I had to buy the game a second time just so I could play it and include it in my retrospective. Worst is, the quest only unlocks after you've completed about 2/3 of the main quest, meaning that most players, even on PlayStation, also didn't get the chance to experience it. I find this kind of stuff unacceptable, especially when the quality on display is so vastly superior to the rest of the package. On the other hand, now that it's been more than a year since its release, it was made available on all platforms during the writing period of this script, meaning that I didn't have to replay the game for a 3rd time just to get footage, which is really cool. But that also means I didn't have to buy the game again just to get footage for this retrospective, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is, I guess. Back to the quest, there's also one more reason why, objectively, this is the worst thing that could have happened to this quest. It automatically forces its inclusion to be inconsequential. What I mean by that is, because the game was also released on Steam, Xbox, and later on the Nintendo Switch, nothing that happens in this quest can affect the rest of the experience, as it would mean removing key components that make multiple gameplay mechanics work. They can't incorporate a new mechanic like becoming a shopkeeper in Hogsmeade, for example, because that would require way more development time and resources. It's the reason why, regardless if you give Penny the hat or not, she won't leave the shop. There's no one to replace her, and the player can't fill that role because, if he did, it will require more animations, more gameplay mechanics, more playtesting, not to mention a huge overhaul of the whole economy. It's for all those reasons that owning a shop makes no difference in the end. Penny is just like any other shopkeeper in Hogsmeade. You don't receive royalties like you would in Skyrim if you married Isolde from Whiterun, for example. You'll get an increase of 10% value on all items sold in the shop and nothing else, which is very bare bone for such a cool concept. However, that's not nearly as lame as its lack of inclusion on the Hogsmeade map. I can't tell you how much time I wasted trying to find the shop on my subsequent visits. You just have to remember that you have to choose the specific spawn and look behind you to find it. Like, why didn't they just rotate the spawn or add a basic marker on the map? My theory is that they knew that there wasn't a real reason for you to visit the shop at a later date. There are no new dialogue options for you to experience. Fastidio never comes back, and Penny only repeats the same few lines until the end of time. This quest, interestingly enough, is also the only one that doesn't reward you with XP upon completion. It doesn't affect any of the 3 quest markers in the challenge tree. It's really disappointing because this could have fleshed out the game, given us something to do in Hogsmeade other than the same window shopping we've definitely grown accustomed to by now. But by having Warner Bros. Make it an exclusivity reward, it was fated to be nothing more than an interesting novelty. What I find the most telling is that, even after all of the missed opportunities, this is still one of the best quests in the game. In retrospect, it's not all that special. You fall into a trap, and getting out requires that we complete multiple fetch quests and kill a bunch of low-tier enemies. Then, we annihilate the perpetrator and gain one more place where we can sell our junk. However, selling it this way undersells the thing that this quest excels in. It's a magical roller coaster. It has cool set pieces. It's unsettling in the best way possible. It also evolves the town just enough that it feels consequential. We just imprisoned a criminal that was wandering freely amongst the townfolk. We just made Hogsmeade that much safer. But nope, none of that matters, because they made it not matter, which is a recurring theme, as you've probably realized. Even worse, that's the best that this game ever gets, because most other quests end up being reiterations of themselves. The bar is so low, in fact, that on my second playthrough, I decided to do something drastic. I turned Hogwarts Legacy into a spreadsheet. I separated the chart into 3 sections. Yellow depicts the side quest category, while the blue section represents the main quest log. In between those 2 sections is the area reserved for collectibles found in the game. I then separated both main sections into identical categories. The first 3 aren't related to the game itself, but serve to ease the editing of the video. They essentially allow me to find the footage that I need, as I currently have to go through almost 2 terabytes of data. Next comes the name of the quest, the locations visited, and how many there were, which are self-explanatory. These are then followed by a category that keeps track of the need to backtrack to complete the quest. Next comes the type of quest, which I'll get into soon, followed by a brief summary of the quest, important characters that are related to said quest, and approximately how long it took to complete. We also have fun factor, which is scored from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best score available. Finally, the last column serves to highlight something noteworthy in the quest, like a glitch or a fun set piece. Going back to the purpose of the spreadsheet, I explained the type of quest in the following way. The categories are: Fetch Quest requires that I find something and bring it back to the quest giver. Murder Spree is a quest where the goal is to annihilate at least one opponent. Treasure quests are those, like the mirror puzzle from earlier, where I have to follow a map and find hidden treasure. Competition stands for any rivalry that's solved by taking part in either a race or a game of wits. As both races and the Summoner's Court challenges are rare, they were bundled up together for ease of labeling. Tutorial depicts a quest where its main focus is to teach us a specific spell or gameplay mechanic. The classes at the beginning of the game fit this description, for example, as their sole purpose is to teach us a spell before letting us practice it. Story-driven are quests that primarily serve to push a general narrative. This category is barely, if ever, found outside of the main quest categories, as almost none of the side quests have an ongoing story. Next, we have the challenges category, which are any quests that require that you take part in a category found under the challenge tab. For example, popping balloons, killing a specific number of the same enemy type, and more would fit in this category. Lastly, and to no shock to anyone that got this far in the video, Collectathon is the last category in my chart. The last thing I want to mention before we examine the chart in detail is that only the main purpose of the quest determines its type. If the goal is to retrieve an item but you encounter enemies along the way, it will only bear the fetch quest category. Combat and puzzles are distractions created to add some spice in the quest, meaning they're expected and would appear in almost every single quest on the chart. With all that said, if we examine the main quest category, we can see that most of them fall under either the tutorial or the story-driven types. More specifically, you can clearly see that most quests are either tutorial-centered until they no longer aren't in the late game. To be even more precise, the last tutorial mission found in the game is numbered at 29 out of 45. It's the quest where we learn how to use the astronomy table and therefore unlock the last side activity found in the open world. Also, the last main quest that requires that we attend a classroom is the Beast class, numbered at 25. Before that point, it would be number 19, which is the class where we learn how to fly our broom. That's a huge stretch, especially when compared from the beginning of the game, where it was back to back on a regular basis. It feels even further from one another when you take into consideration that you're encouraged to explore the open world after the 22nd quest. In a game that sold itself as a student simulator, you can see that there's a clear bait and switch that happens further down the line, and that, once flooded by the unnecessary open world, dilutes the whole experience to the point that the whole package suffers as a result. There are also no more classes after the 27th quest, making the inconsistency even bigger as a result. However, if you examine the fun factor found in the next to last category, you can see that the numbers remain consistently high throughout the experience. Yes, there is indeed a considerable dip in quality the further you get close to the end, but overall, I find it to be more than acceptable. If you just did the main quest and you ignored everything else to the maximum, I think you would have a pretty good experience overall, regardless of the disappointing ending. Shockingly, if we switch sides and look at the side quest category, we can see the complete opposite. The further we go down the chart, the more each quest is either a fetch quest, a collectathon, or a challenge. Very few quests fit in the other categories, which is insane to me. Like, a handful of quests fit in the competitive category, even if competitive activities are generally intertwined with the lives of wizards in the original source material. Even more shocking is the lack of quests that require that you primarily either defeat a boss or a specific group of enemies. This to me means that either the devs had no confidence in the longevity of the combat system to the point that they avoided it as much as possible, or that programming those required more effort. Actually, I think that there's a third alternative, but I'll only get to that one once we're done revisiting Hogwarts. Overall, this just shows you just how unfulfilling the game feels the further you get into it. All the original and fun ideas were used up, and what was left was the standard crap that was considered outdated a decade ago. Plus, when combined with everything else I've mentioned so far, it becomes difficult to imagine why the devs even opted to create an open world when their offering damages the replayability and long-term appreciation of the game. Worst is that, after you spend all this time trying to find some enjoyment in the open world, you'll desperately decide to go back to Hogwarts and Hogsmeade, hoping to find that charm and warmth that opened your senses and made you want to play the game up to this point. Unfortunately for us, once our eyes have been opened to the issues plaguing the game, we can never take the other pill and go back into the wizarding matrix. Not even a minute after arriving in Hogsmeade, you will start seeing the same issues that were plaguing the Hamlets. The streets are mainly filled with people that are just standing there, talking about stuff that has no correlation between all parties involved. It gets worse because, as most of them are programmed to stay in a specific spot, with no supporting animations of any kind, you can phase through them if you stand at the exact spot that they're standing on, turning you into a doppelganger with a split personality. You can also repeat this process with any of them, which I find quite odd because I don't understand why it had to be programmed this way or why it never got fixed. It would have been easy to make them move around and reposition themselves, which in turn would have fixed this super easy glitch to reproduce. This observation is also representative of individuals making magic on the side of the street. If you bump into one of them, the trick will continue as the individual falls on the ground, meaning that the whole thing is a parlor trick. In fact, now that I think about it, there's barely any magic happening in the town to begin with. Other than the person we just saw, there's this person next to J. Pippin's potions, and the same guy from before that's entertaining a crowd on the side of the street, and that's it. Magic in Hogsmeade is shown by giving life to inanimate objects through a looped animation sequence. Flowers are being watered by themselves, and bushes are being trimmed by an invisible force. You can also find a butcher knife cutting meat by itself, and an axe that chops wood on command. It all feels impersonal and very basic, which is uncanny because our initial impression was the complete opposite. Now the question is, why? Why did it initially seem better than it actually is? And I think that there are two main reasons for that. The first one being that we desperately wanted a good Harry Potter game after all the horrible titles we had to endure. So getting something that looks the part really went a long way in selling the experience. The second reason goes hand in hand with the previous one, which is that both Hogsmeade and Hogwarts use their iconic music to hide their imperfections. For example, in this shot, I'm in the candy shop called Zonko's. Initially, you'll be bewitched because it's a very faithful replica of the one in the movie. You'll be hypnotized by the automated magic tricks and the colors that make the store stand out from its peers. We want to be there and experience all that the game has to offer, so the simplicity helps sell that dream to us the first time around. However, once you remove the emotional factor and look at it more closely, you'll realize that there's no sound related to any of the animations. The girl on screen is choking on some candy that she picked up, and yet, we can't even hear a single cough. Then, after a short while, she switches animations and repositions herself in a way that looks more like a glitch than anything else. In reality, the animators didn't center both starting positions of the animations. They essentially didn't make their keyframes identical, which in turn makes it look as sloppy as it does. There's also this guy here who's looking at brooms, having the same problem, meaning that it's far from being a contained issue. By the way, for some reason, the devs decided to add grunt noises to the girl on the broom, which makes me wonder why they decided that she deserves the extra treatment, and it made me realize that, with her being the only one, it really makes the scene look worse as a result. Another animation issue that I found is located in the 3 broomsticks. We can see 3 out of 5 characters executing the exact same animation. It's the kind of thing that goes unnoticed until it doesn't anymore, and you just can't unsee it. There's one last thing that I want to share with you, and this one is actually quite funny. I was walking down the main street in Hogsmeade, trying to see if I can find something else for my script, when I realized that one of the NPCs was talking to himself. I presumed that the game glitched and forgot to spawn another NPC, so I decided to fill the missing role and see what he has to say.
May she rest in peace. If I'd been born a squib, I'd never show my face in public. I can't imagine how embarrassing it must be to have a squib for a child. It's impossible to stay sane after staying in Azkaban with those dementors. No one has ever escaped from Azkaban. They say it's impossible. There's nothing the Ministry could do to repair the damage they've done. What do squibs even do with their lives? How do you survive without magic?
What the fuck did I just hear? That kind of made my day, I'm not gonna lie. However, I get that this confirms mental health problems aren't curable by magic, which is a bummer on its own. By the way, I discovered something while playing with the settings. You can turn off the ambient music and keep all other noises in the game. Let's take a listen, shall we?
Expelliarmus can disarm a dark wizard, no doubt. But then what? Fleeing?
The tales of Beetle the Bard still ring true today.
Whatever my task, I console myself knowing that some soul
Captain of the Chuckling Cannons.
As you can hear, there are barely any sounds that were added in the environment. The dialogue does appear slightly louder, but as most other sounds are straight up missing, it makes the city feel barren and extremely unfinished. This is made even clearer when you enter the 3 broomsticks once more and realize that you can barely hear anything other than some random dialogue exchange. Where's the sound of the forks hitting the ceramic plates? Or the sound of people drinking their beverages? Where's the sound of alcohol being poured into a tankard? Or the sound of food being masticated? Let me remind you that these are the sounds available during peak working hours, so here's what they sound like during a late evening period.
Quite well. Not a day goes by I don't wish I'd paid better attention to defense against the dark arts.
Also, if you place yourself too close to this guy, the food glitches because he immediately reverts to his repositioning animation done independently, meaning it deletes the food until his programming puts him back where he was before I bothered him. Moving on, there's one last issue that I want to talk about, and it was made more apparent after reading through the art book. Most pages that are dedicated to Hogsmeade talk about the shopkeepers and how a lot of effort went into giving each of them their own distinct personality. It mentions how they created a lineage for each, and that helped determine how they were going to look and behave in the game. Those traits then served to make their shops complementary, which, all combined, made them feel like real tangible people in the eyes of the player. Take the J. Popman's Potion Store for example. If you take their comments at face value, then I would agree with their statement. His store does indeed look distinct, and you definitely get a sense of history from the placement of all the merchandise. They definitely nailed the look and, as usual, I have no issues giving them the praise they deserve. However, the problem lies once more with how the player interacts with said environment. After you've seen the introductory cutscene, no further dialogue or interaction exchanges will occur, turning him into a shopkeeper like any other. He just stands there and compliments you every time you sell him some of your clothes, just like any other shopkeeper in the Highlands. Although, for transparency's sake, he's one of the rare shopkeepers in Hogsmeade that has a side quest. It's also one of the most boring side quests available, but it's a side quest nonetheless. Unfortunately, one thing that it doesn't do is develop the character further. All you have to do is deliver an invisible potion to a difficult client. She then rejects it, calling the guy incompetent and doesn't trust that the potion works, even if it's stated that she bought from him in the past, meaning that, logically, she has no reason to doubt him. Regardless, we drink the potion for her, and she retracts her statement once it's clear that she's as full of it as the Dursleys. We then head back and end the quest. Nowhere did we learn something new or added on to a predefined notion, signifying that, even with the extra time, there's nothing to differentiate him from the man that sells mallow sweet leaves or the man selling clothes. This is then made even more monotonous when you take into consideration that you're never going to visit any of them because there's a specific thing you wish to buy from them. You'll essentially be interacting with the first store that crosses your path every time you want to sell your unwanted clothes for a predefined fee. Side tangent, as there's no sell all button, you'll be forced to sell them one by one, verifying that it has a lower power level than your own, which makes everything even more goddamn boring. I genuinely think that if we had more types of loot, it would have helped the game in every sense of the word, because it would force the player to be more engaged with what he picks up. Finding treasure could yield more rare crafting material, for example, which in turn would have made your gear even stronger. It would have also given the player more options when role-playing. For example, when I play Fallout 3, my goal is always to get a house in Megaton as soon as possible, so that I may start covering my bed with all the teddy bears that I find throughout my adventures. In Legacy, I could have collected all the skulls that I found, or every time that I killed a boss, I could have grabbed something to act as a trophy. Now, all the clothes that you get don't matter, as you can change the look of yours by the press of 2 buttons, making all rewards seem meaningless and bland way sooner than they need it to be. It also makes selling stuff very uneventful, because you're not sorting your items by going through multiple menus. You're just changing the tab and holding the interact button on all clothes that are marked with red text. This issue actually goes deeper than that, as it also means that there's nothing worth buying in the whole game. The whole economy runs on fast fashion, which is okay by itself, but as you'll be finding clothes on a regular basis, you won't have an incentive to buy anything because the market is flooded with options. There's also no need to get stronger from a combat perspective, so all of your money will go towards buying the few things that aren't clothes and can actually be useful, like blueprints and the few broom cosmetics that you can't find in the wild. Even so, if you're not trying to 100% all categories in the collection tab, you probably won't be buying anything more than what's necessary for the main quest, which, in retrospect, isn't all that much. It's honestly quite sad when you come to that realization, because Hogsmeade is treated as a shopping area in both the movies and in the game. If we would have been able to buy a bunch of chocolate frogs, purchase and eat a box of every flavor beans whenever we wanted, I think that it would have been more memorable as a result. Even more basic, if they made it possible to just sit down, order a butterbeer as we watch the NPCs pass by, I would have been able to forgive more of its shortcomings. As it stands, there's nothing more for me to do than to buy the few items that I want and to complete the handful of quests that actually take part in Hogsmeade. There also aren't any minigames for you to complete or branching dialogue paths for you to assimilate yourself in the town. There's also no karma system, which means that no one reacts to whatever you do, and other than the time that the town gets attacked by 2 trolls, nothing else you or anyone else does has an effect on the surroundings. It always feels as if you're a tourist in a wax museum. It's beautiful and impressive at first, but on closer inspection, the uncanny valley sets in and you start wishing for more. The same can be said about Hogwarts, and as I'll be treading similar grounds, I'm gonna keep this brief. Here's my protagonist standing next to some students in the Ravenclaw common room. Here's me next to some students on the roof of the same common room. If those 2 grunts weren't downloaded from a stock library, then color me surprised because they're extremely generic at best. Moving on, here's how it sounds with the ambient music turned off and standing in the Defense Against the Dark Arts tower.
Why would Black want to be headmaster of Hogwarts? Of course, I'm not sure what job he'd actually be good at. Perhaps something at Azkaban.
And finally, this is how it sounds to be in the middle of a feast in the famous Great Hall without the soundtrack. A couple of things that are worth mentioning. 1. We see the same situation as in the 3 broomsticks, where multiple characters have the same identical animation. 2. A lot of the NPCs repeat, which would be fine if they didn't have the first issue that I mentioned. And 3. Worst crime of all, we can't sit down and join the students, which, again, is probably the only thing that all fans wanted to do in this room. Also, if you get unlucky, the audio might also glitch and the crowd sound effect won't load, turning an already sorry sight into something even more lackluster. This is a recurring issue found, especially in Hogwarts, which is that they often get so close to creating something magical, only to end in disappointment because they either didn't push it far enough, or the AI is so basic that it kind of kills the moment. Here are a few examples, with the first one being a random event where a student receives a howler, just like in the second
No more
movie.
broom racing for you, and I better not hear one more peep. Good day.
So the howler itself is pretty cool, but the reaction of the NPC leaves a lot to be desired, as well as in the walking animation. Let's see how the rest plays out.
Why do students always run when Peevesy wants to have some fun?
NPCs glitching through doors is a regular occurrence in the game. The mapping of the characters rarely know how to deal with doors, or, in worst cases, it completely ignores it, making the character phase through it in the worst way that you just saw. That's also the moment where I decided to abandon the chase altogether and see what the commotion was all about. Turns out that the knight was annoyed by his partner and decided to break him into pieces. Peeves is also obviously loving the turmoil, so the moment is quite cool. It represents quite well what we expect to see in Hogwarts. However, what breaks the immersion for me is that, once everything is done, I can't cast Reparo to put the knight back in its original position. This is one of the many examples that show the limitations of the world. The devs didn't design it to be interactable. They created theatrical set pieces where the goal is to entertain the audience, but as this is an open world game where the way you interact with it dictates the fun factor, this is just one of the many ways where the game breaks the logical continuity of its gameplay philosophy. Here's another example. You can occasionally find Peeves messing around with students around the school, and here's one such occasion. For context, a couple of students are having a study session in the hallway, and Peeves shows up to cause some trouble.
She says it's a boot, and he says it's a flat.
Peeves, enough! You'll get us all detention. And you're both wrong anyway. It was Hephaestus Gore.
It wasn't boot and it wasn't flack, but you're all in trouble with Professor Black.
Again, other than the fact that the scene is lacking a bunch of sound effects, notably from the Ravenclaw that's standing up, there are also lip sync issues and a general lack of emotions from the surrounding NPCs. Then, once Peeves leaves, they all just reset immediately, as if nothing had ever happened, removing any long-term emotional impact that the event would have had otherwise. The game has so many moments like this that I'm genuinely surprised that barely anyone mentioned it in their videos. Here's another basic mistake that they made, which seems small until you factor in with the other two examples. One thing that annoys me a lot in this game is that you can't put out a fire with the Glacio spell. Everywhere that you go, your spells have zero effect on the world, so all fires found in the Hamlets and in Hogwarts can't be extinguished. Until the devs specifically intended for it, like in this unique instance where you have to extinguish a fireplace so you may access a hidden staircase in the wall. This is the only time in the whole game where you're allowed to follow basic logic and put out a fire with Glacio. It really irritates me because the devs give you the ability to set things on fire or to freeze them over. It's logical that the devs should have made it possible for us to light and snuff out any fires at will, and yet we can't. Until this very instance where they show us that they would have been able to make it happen if they wanted to. Here's one last example, with it being the most impactful in my opinion. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that there was a single exploration challenge that was dedicated to Hogwarts Castle. It's called Solving Hogwarts Secrets, and immediately in my mind, I think of the Chamber of Secrets. I know that it would break the Harry Potter canon if a random student found it 100 years before anyone else and never mentioned it, so in a sense, I get why it wasn't included in the game. That, and it would have required a lot of resources for something that would inevitably be an Easter egg. However, that doesn't stop the devs from creating other secret areas or events that wouldn't have an effect on the continuity beyond this game. The more I think about it, the more ideas I get in my mind of what they could have done, which sounds a lot better than what they actually did. Here are all 3 challenges, as the devs like to call them, that you need to complete so that you may max out the category. The first one can be found on the bridge located at the back of the castle. On all 4 extremities, you will find a torch with a symbol sketched at the bottom of it. All 4 of them have their own symbol, so you would think that there would be some deduction involved when solving the puzzle, but nope. The solution was incorporated into the floor, so getting the secret is as easy as looking at it and proceeding to light the torches while aligning the symbols with the numbers. Then, once all 4 are in, you find out that the platform with the solution sketched onto it is also acting as the entrance to the secret compartment found under the bridge. This is where it gets interesting because you go down the hole and expect something unique from it. Is it a hideout of some kind, or is there something different to see? It's only after looting all 3 containers that you realize that that's it. The secret in Hogwarts was a hidden room that contains the same rewards that you've been collecting since the start of the game. Worst is, there are other hidden rooms in Hogwarts, so why is this one considered a secret is beyond me. To make matters even worse, the fact that no one has found the solution to this puzzle makes all students look like idiots again. Like, you can't have it easier than having the solution etched onto the puzzle. It's so stupidly easy, in fact, that the only secret this puzzle has is how it's able to bring no interest in the fact that you just found a perfectly usable hideout, away from all prying eyes and anyone that might cause us harm. The second challenge is barely a step up from the first one. Once you've completed the South Wing area, by completing the mission that grants you the level 1 Alohomora spell, you get to climb up to the clock mechanic and admire its beauty. However, you'll rapidly realize that there are 8 symbols etched onto it. 4 are located at the top, and another 4 obviously connected at the bottom. Simultaneously, you'll be running through the linear corridors that face the clock and discover some doors that are protected by a gate also contain one of the symbols carved onto the clock. All you have to do is use Arrest of Momentum as the pendulum goes over the symbol and sprint back to the door. Repeat the process, open all the chests, and you get the reward. Again, why is this called Solve Hogwarts Secrets if the puzzles are easier than what you find all over Hogwarts? I found the door puzzles and the mosquito light puzzles that litter the castle harder than the 2 puzzles I just mentioned, which is strange to say the least. Now, hold on to your seats because I'm going to blow your mind. You ready? The last puzzle is a real puzzle and it feels rewarding to solve. During one of your excursions, you'll discover a locked door located near the headmaster's office. It's an instant eye-catcher as no other door even remotely looks similar to it, and, weirder still, Alohomora has no effect on it. Don't ask why though, we just need to find a key called the Key of Admittance, and that's that. Well, it turns out that your curiosity will have to wait, as it's the last room that you can unlock. After you've discovered the password to the headmaster's office and proceeded to go up the stairs, you'll rapidly end up in front of a locked door. Again, Alohomora doesn't work on it for reasons that, once again, will remain a mystery. Setting that aside, this artificial barrier causes a real conundrum because, if you played the game like I have, you've already exhausted all available avenues before this point. I was only missing a handful of collectibles and, as the game didn't require any keys beforehand, I didn't really know where to start looking for it. Well, it turns out that figuring out how to access the door was the whole puzzle. You see, this passage leads to a rising staircase, but, unlike all of its peers, it's accessible from the outside. If you summon a mount and land on the staircase, you'll be able to circumvent the door and access the rest of the tower. That is, if you fully upgraded the Alohomora spell, as the level 2 spell unlocks the main room, while the final level grants you access to the highest point of the tower. This is also where you'll find the aforementioned key, and unlock the achievement for gaining access to the highest room in Hogwarts. Then, on our way back, we unlock the bolted door, exit the office, and head towards the mysterious door. After a sick animation where the lock rotates, unlocking itself as it goes along, we head up the new set of stairs and reap our 2 rewards. The first comes in the form of a big silver chest, while the other one is a unique artifact that never appears in the movies, the Quill of Acceptance and the Book of Admittance. The description reads as follows. The Quill of Acceptance and Book of Admittance were placed there by the founders and have not been touched since. They record the name of every prospective Hogwarts student the moment they show first signs of magic. Although, the quill is more lenient than the book, which will sometimes snap shut before a name is written if the evidence of magic is not dramatic enough. I find this to be a cool reward for 2 reasons. The first one is that, shocker, it fits perfectly with what we'd imagine when we first hear Hogwarts secrets. This book contains the names of everyone located in Hogwarts jurisdiction that has a magical inclination. In the wrong hands, it could be as powerful, if not more so, than the bottled prophecies from the 5th installment. If I were a famous Death Eater like Voldemort, I would try to steal the book and create something like the Mark program in Alo, steal a bunch of impressionable kids and indoctrinate them into the flock, creating an army of zealots that would dedicate their lives for the cause. It's therefore for that reason, I believe, that it's locked behind a complex lock. The second reason stems from the emotional factor that a relic like this brings up in the player. We can easily imagine Harry and the gang's names being added onto its pages 100 years from now, which, again, brings us back to the memberberries that the game conditioned us to feel at any given moment. By itself, I think that this is an excellent quest that suffers from the fact that it was included in this game. Finding the staircase is a frustrating endeavor because nothing in the game comes even remotely close to that level of experimentation. As you saw from the other 2 puzzles, they were extremely on the nose and required barely any reflection from the player. It's therefore very frustrating, and I can easily imagine that most players never found the solution because of it. But I'm sure that, if you ever did end up finding it, that frustration would have rapidly transformed into a strong sense of fascination. It shows that the devs are capable of making puzzles that they trust that the player is smart enough to use the tools at his disposal and figure out the solution. It's no wonder that, in my mind, this is the most memorable challenge in the whole game. It's the only one that actually qualifies as a challenge, and it's the only time that I genuinely had no idea on how to proceed. Who would have thought that encouraging the player to think for themselves would in turn create a more engaging experience? As a whole, I would say that the main issue surrounding Hogwarts and subsequently the rest of the game is that when the honeymoon phase expires, you start to realize just how unfinished the game feels. You'll see teachers looking in the mirror until the end of time, completely ignoring you and anything that you do. Students do the same and either stand in one place, are sitting in one place, or are walking to some random point while phasing through some of the doors. Plus, when you find something unique, like the corridor with musicians that I mentioned earlier, you discover that it isn't as special as they reused the paintings without the music, meaning the devs were inconsistent when creating interesting set pieces for their game. Same goes with the puzzles. There are 3 hidden dungeons in Hogwarts, and I use the term hidden very loosely as they're marked on your map. Regardless, those are actually fun because the solutions are genuinely hard, like I had to resort to a YouTube guide just to get through them. This is great stuff indeed, but the game doesn't value them. You get one quest that introduces them, and that's it. They aren't marked in your challenge section of the book either, even if it's the most challenging thing in the game, funnily enough. The game also doesn't keep track of the number of doors that you've unlocked, or the number of mosquito light puzzles you've completed. The devs thought that it was preferable to, instead, keep track of the number of landing pads that you've interacted with, or the number of balloons that you've popped in the open world. Seriously though, I had to keep track of them myself in my Excel chart, like, by the end of the game, I had completed 15 light puzzles, unlocked 8 doors, used Leviosa on 10 spheres, ignited 8 cups, and, finally, creeped on 12 chests with eyes. Paradoxically, the Daedalic keys are actually tracked by the side quest bearing its name, and the same can be said for the Demigeises. Also, can you guess what the reward is for collecting all of the Daedalic keys and subsequently the house tokens? Guess. For real. Yeah, obviously, more clothes. In total, if you want 100% Hogwarts alone, you have to complete a total of 78 monotonous tasks, just so you can collect all of the field guide pages in the area. Speaking of those field guide pages, what started off as a great idea rapidly soured, becoming the worst idea the devs came up with. There are a total of 150 pages for you to collect in Hogwarts alone, meaning that what was once thrilling has now become a part-time job. At a certain point, you won't be looking at them anymore. You'll just go from one point to another, collecting as you go so the counter gets closer to its maximum. Plus, what makes the whole experience shallower is the fact that you'll never even be allowed to interact with any of the cool things that you encounter along the way, removing any magic that may have initially come from their inclusion. That's why I started this video by comparing it to the Universal Parks. You see, when you enter Diagon Alley for the first time, the rush of emotion that engulfs you is quite sublime. They nailed the aesthetics of the world, and the dragon on top of the bank is just icing on the cake. You then enter a store and get blown away by the realism of it all. Everywhere you go, you'll be seeing something new that's either moving or making sounds, adding to the atmosphere in a way only this universe can replicate. It's also in those moments that you'll start to believe paying $200 was actually cheap when compared to the experience on offer, because both parks nailed the most crucial thing that they had to get right: the immersion factor. Nothing feels out of place, and as customers buy their licensed merchandise, it gives the surrounding people the impression of being in Harry Potter's shoes when traversing Diagon Alley for the first time. People of all sizes are playing around with their wands and wearing the school uniform. Others are wearing owl plushies on their shoulders while drinking Universal's version of the butterbeer, and the list goes on. It's an extremely satisfying experience, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone looking for a good time, especially if you can bring some amazing company along the way. Thanks again, Mom, I really appreciate it. However, Universal's obsession with perfection is also its greatest downfall, which is that the world lacks the human touch. After a few hours roaming the streets of Diagon Alley or Hogsmeade, you'll start thinking of the things Universal either couldn't emulate or that they had to sacrifice to supplement their greed. Same as in Hogwarts Legacy, the visitors can't interact with almost anything. Most of it is designed to be out of reach, meaning that the tour neglects one of the core senses of human interactivity. This is then made even more apparent when you realize that both towns don't have a defining smell. As more set pieces are made of animatronics and other forms of electronics, the air smells sterile and void of the richness that you would find when entering the Zonko shop or a magical pet store. Plus, when you factor in the reality that all stores contain what I would quantify as 80% of the same merchandise, you'll inevitably start feeling like you're repeating the same process over and over again. You'll enter one store, take pictures, or videos in my case, and then start visually scrutinizing the shelves so you can find the unique trinkets that it has to offer. It also goes without saying that all of this is before you factor in the costs, which are ludicrous to say the least. It's for those reasons that I couldn't stop thinking about Hogwarts Legacy when I went in both parks. If you remove the money from the equation, as there's barely anything to buy in the video game, you end up in a very similar experience. The opening hours are unique in the best ways imaginable. Both have the same strengths and weaknesses, which are that it looks and feels immersive as long as you don't look too closely at it. Both want to dazzle you with its colors and product placement, but end up feeling like complex parlor tricks. In the end, both are worth experiencing in my opinion, even if they inevitably end up feeling underwhelming by the end. However, there is one key difference between both offerings, and it's that the parks end up disappointing, not because of incompetence, but because of technological limitations. I genuinely believe that they're as good as they can be when considering the obvious fact that you simply can't bring dragons, goblins, and other magical beings to life. At the moment, you kind of have to fake it till you make it, and for what it's worth, I think they succeeded in spades. I think that overall, I was just left wanting more, which is far from being a bad thing. However, the same can't be said from the video game because those limitations don't exist. The devs could have made us do anything they wanted, but opted with the easy way out by implementing so many simple gameplay loops that it's almost disrespectful to the license. This then brings up an interesting question, which is, why? Why did the devs release the game the way that they did? And, on surface level, it kind of seems impossible to answer. The devs never really spoke about it, and, as the game was a huge commercial and critical success, no one really decided to interview the devs in the same way that journalists did for the Lord of the Rings Gollum and Anthem. However, after thinking it over for several months, I think that there are 4 major factors that affected the game's development. Do know that these are just speculations on my end, and I have nothing to back it up, so do at least listen to what I have to say and then make your own opinion. However, I'm very confident that after you've heard my arguments, you will agree that these had some effect one way or another on both the development and the devs making the game. For starters, Portkey, the label created by Warner Bros. In 2017, has so far been used to create a bunch of mobile-centered experiences. Since its inception, Warner Bros. Contracted a different developer for each project, releasing a game yearly until they skipped a year and released Hogwarts Legacy. The first game, called Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, sees the player attend school and use his character's stats to influence most dialogue options. They'll also be learning new spells, taking part in duels, dating other students, and more. The idea behind it is that most actions depend on the amount of energy that you have left on any given day. It basically acts as the currency of all important actions, limiting what you can do as you're forced to wait for it to regenerate over time. This also means that you can spend real money to counter the game's slow pacing, allowing you more options while making play sessions longer. Next came a game based on Pokemon Go, which, conveniently enough, was made by the same company. The game sees the player physically walking around town as he visits key locations, casts spells, discovers magical artifacts, and more. It sounds like a dream come true for any Potter fan, but sadly, it was also received poorly by both the fans and the critics. Warner Bros. Therefore decided to shut it down after only 2 years on the market. Next came Harry Potter Puzzles and Spells, which is your typical Candy Crush clone. It plays mostly the same, with the key difference being its tie-in with the license. At the time of writing the script, it had a 4.7 average rating on Google Play, so it definitely seems like there's more depth here than your typical quick reskin of the second most grossing mobile game in 2024. Monopoly Go was the first one in case you were curious. Finally, we have Harry Potter Magic Awakened. It's a card collecting role-playing game made by Zen Studios and published by NetEase. As a new student attending Hogwarts, you'll be collecting cards throughout your multiple school years. Combat, being card-based, requires that you upgrade your deck regularly and learn what cards have strong chemistry, creating strong combos that deal crippling damage to the enemy. At the same time, the game has a strong narrative focus, allowing you to create your own avatar and meet famous characters from the series. All in all, it's reviewed better than the first two, but can't compete with the Candy Crush clone, which just shows you how strong the core of that gameplay loop is. When combining all 4 years since Portkey's inception, the game's grossed $1 billion in revenue in total in 2022, which is really good, but far from enough. Just to give you an idea, Candy Crush alone made that same amount in the same year, while here Warner Bros. Had to combine the revenue of 4 games during a span of 4 years just to make the cut. It's through that lens that we can start to better understand the climate that Legacy was made in. Warner Bros. Needed a solid win, and all projects that were in development during that same time period weren't actually paying the bills. I therefore find it interesting that Warner Bros. Would create a bunch of mobile games and subsequently fund a full AAA project with what was, by this point, a strictly mobile label. It gets even more intriguing from here because when looking at it through that lens, you can definitely see the mobile influences in Hogwarts Legacy. The game starts epic enough, only to use that adrenaline to encourage you to slog through the rest of its offerings. This is very similar to how mobile games initially shower you with gifts, only to pull on those same strings after you've invested a lot of your time and effort. The menus in-game also have this touch-based feel to them. The icons are big, grouped under the fewest categories possible, as to maximize the amount of data on each. Add in the very simplistic and clean presentation, and you end up with a general presentation that I think would translate well into a touch-based display. Loot also functions on the color system, which makes it easy to gloss over and act accordingly. On top of all that, the fact that they're closed makes it easy to duplicate without sacrificing the overall experience of the game. Plus, once I go over the room of requirement, you'll see that making a mobile comparison becomes even harder to deny. I strongly believe that it's one of the reasons why a lot of the game's shortcomings are baked deep into its design. Whoever guided Avalanche Software during production used its mobile guidelines to steer the team in a familiar direction, which in turn modified the criteria of success for each category. This then ties into my second reason, which is that Avalanche Software doesn't have a good track record to begin with. not to be confused by Avalanche Studios, who made the Just Cause series, Rage 2, the Mad Max video game, and more. Avalanche Software mainly specialized in family-friendly movie licensed games for Disney. Starting in 2005, they exclusively made games for Disney, and all of them, except for the Toy Story 3 game, received average scores at best. They finally got their first win with the release of Disney Infinity in 2013, and, for a while, it worked out pretty well for them. Unfortunately, after 2 years and 2 versions of the game being released, Disney shut down both the Disney Infinity project and the studio. Low sales in the toy-to-life department, with the added cost of production, sealed their fate and sent everyone packing home until Warner Brothers bought the studio and reopened it with mostly the same staff. At first glance, it might seem like a bad idea to buy a failing studio for cheap, and I do agree to some extent. As stated previously, they had a mediocre track record, and Disney didn't see the point of keeping them around, so why would Warner Bros. Jump into the opportunity? Well, my theory is that the studio's closure happened around the time that Warner Brothers was acquiring the Harry Potter license. They knew that the studio had an extensive amount of knowledge on making games in the said universe, which is a talent that Warner lacked at the time. They also knew that acquiring it at Disney's loss would probably cost them less than creating a new company, while also allowing them to preserve the existing infrastructure. This, in turn, would allow them to rehire some of the staff, including the chief executive officer. Knowledge is the most sought-after thing in the video game industry, and even if the work wasn't that great, they still knew how to get the job done. Plus, with Warner Brothers' resources, they probably hoped that they would be able to turn the company around and yield a better return than what Disney got from them. In that sense, I think they succeeded because Hogwarts Legacy is Avalanche's most ambitious and most critically acclaimed game since their creation in 1995. It's also important to acknowledge that the leap that they had made since Disney Infinity 3 and Cars 3 is quite stupendous. It's undeniable that they gave it their all, and the circumstances that led to its release, mixed in with their will to prove themselves, paid off in the long term, and for that, I tip my hat to them. However, we also can't deny that the studio's shortcomings are also apparent in Hogwarts Legacy. They've never done a game of this magnitude or complexity before. This is their first ever open world game. It's also their first mature action role-playing game with third-person shooting mechanics, if you can call it that, and more. Avalanche Software basically lacked the knowledge to make a game of this size, so it's quite shocking to see them succeed as well as they have. Also, let's be honest for a second here, most of my complaints can also be found in other projects made by leading companies, like Ubisoft or Bethesda, hence my initial comment. Also, in case it wasn't made obvious by now, the reason I felt the urge to make this video over all others is because I genuinely believe that the untapped potential here is huge. I think that if they had more time and were maybe offered more support or guidance, we might have gotten an endlessly replayable game in the likes of The Witcher 3, Skyrim, or most of the Fallout games. It's that frustration that drives me, and one can only hope that they will examine their final product and act accordingly to the already announced sequel. However, it's not that simple because the next 2 reasons that I have are unfortunately out of their control. The silver lining is that the first one is circumstantial for the time period that the game was made, and therefore shouldn't affect them in the future. Hogwarts Legacy started production in 2018 and was subsequently released in 2023. Can you recall what happened during that time period? More specifically in the middle of its production? COVID-19. It was a time of uncertainty, limiting the options of all citizens around the world, including those trying to make a decent video game. New safety protocols were in place, making work from office difficult and working from home a fun but frustrating endeavor. How do you therefore record dialogue exchanges in the studio when you can't have 2 people in close proximity? How do you get feedback on your work when the staff is on a rotational schedule? How can you create side quests if you can't easily communicate with all other parties involved? The only part in the art book that indirectly supports my claim is this part here found on page 2019. It's the introduction to the chapter that talks about their thought process when designing all quests in the game. The mission design lead, Kelly Murphy, states that coordinating game design and narrative elements to craft the missions took an understanding of not only the needs of the mission, but also where the mission takes place in the context of gameplay, world, and narrative. As is typical with any game development, the game went through a large directional shift midway through development, which meant not only culling missions, but also changing our philosophy behind them. This led to hard decisions about what to keep, what to cut, and what to create from scratch. On the surface, that quote is talking about the normal development process of any game, so naturally, it wouldn't seem like something worth noting. However, the midway development happened around the 2020-2021 period, which is also when COVID started affecting society worldwide. I therefore think that the quote is a double meaning. Yes, you want to trim the excess fat of any project and only create assets, mechanics, set pieces, and more that bring tangible value to the experience. As parts of the development come closer to its end, it's normal that you have to reassess everything and see what ideas are no longer working with the current direction of the project. On the other hand, as it happened around the same time period as the pandemic, I wouldn't be shocked if I found out that they cut more than they initially planned because of technical limitations caused by the work environment. This, mixed in with the two other pointers, would start to explain why the game's dialogue and sound designs are lacking in every way imaginable, why most side quests are fetch quests, and why the open world portion of the game feels so limited. On top of the team being overwhelmed, they also had to deal with the worldwide crisis and find ways to accommodate the staff and still meet their deadlines. Luckily for them, unless we hit a recession and the economy gets worse, they shouldn't have to deal with this issue any longer. Changes to the workplace should be finalized by now, and normal workflow should follow suit. However, there's one final factor that will always loom over the project, which means that yes, after 5 hours of video, I finally have to talk about the controversies surrounding the game and subsequently the whole license. Now, before I go any further, I want to reiterate that I have zero stakes or interest in anything I'm going to be covering. I'm just going to be doing my journalistic duty, which means that I'm going to go through the facts as neutrally as possible so that I can talk about an issue that arose during the development. Most, if not all, of the info found in this next segment was taken from a Glamour article called A Complete Breakdown of the J.K. Rowling's Transgender Comments Controversy. It's the first article that appears when you search J.K. Rowling controversy on Google, and after comparing it to other websites that appear on the same search page, I found this one to be the most complete and the easiest to read for someone who has no prior knowledge of the issue at hand. If you would like to read it for yourself, you'll find a link to the article below the like button. This whole mess started on June 6, 2020, when J.K. Rowling retweeted an article centered around the different issues that women were facing during and post-COVID-19. More specifically, she had no issues with the article itself. It was the title that was the cause of her outrage. She took insult from the fact that the title doesn't use the term woman, but instead opted to call the group People Who Menstruate. This caused some backlash, which was only made worse when she decided to explain herself in the tweet chain by stating that, and I quote, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth." She followed up by saying, "The idea of women like me, who've been empathetic to trans people for decades, feeling kinship because they're vulnerable in the same way as women, i.e. to male violence, hate trans people because they think sex is real and has lived consequences, is a nonsense." If you're like me and you found that quote a little confusing, the gist of it is that there are only two sexes, male and female, and when you remove one of them, for example, the women in this case, it prevents that group from talking about the issues that surround their lives. As you can imagine, this made the backlash worse, which pushed her to write a lengthy post on her website and subsequently tweet it, calling it TERF Wars. TERF being an acronym that stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. From my understanding, her goal was to fix the global perception by setting the record straight. She reinstated her support to attack specialists that allegedly lost their job because of some transphobic tweets. She also stated that she invested a lot of time in understanding the many issues plaguing the trans community while doing research for her new book. Finally, she warns the reader with 5 reasons why current trans activism could hinder the community in the long run. This is the exact moment where shit hits the fan, because not only did she do a poor job at explaining herself, but she also doubled down on a stance that goes against the societal current movements. This then became a hot topic that expanded in proportion as actors from the Harry Potter series made their voices heard, with most of them going against Rowling's statements. Threats of all kinds were sent her way, trying to silence her voice once and for all. However, those had the opposite effect, with her responding publicly to some of them, doing an overall poor job once more of controlling the situation. Overall, this started off as kindling that grew into a forest fire, engulfing anyone far and wide that associated with her. This then led to fans not only criticizing her, but her book publishers and movie producers. A lot of people were irritated at the fact that she was able to keep publishing books under the same label. The team behind her were also able to secure a deal on an HBO TV series. The bottom line is that people wanted to see her disappear from all forms of social media, so anything that could make her money, directly or indirectly, had to be eradicated from the face of the earth. Enter Hogwarts Legacy, a AAA video game set in the Harry Potter universe that lets fans experience their wildest dreams in an open-world setting. As the game got closer to release, Warner Bros. Had to invest extensive resources on crowd control. Many were pissed at the notion that, even if the controversial writer had no direct involvement with the game, she still owns the intellectual rights to the license, and is therefore going to receive some form of compensation one way or another. This was enough for some fans to boycott its release, and refuse to support it monetarily. Plus, when fans found out that the game had a confirmed transgender character, Sirona Ryan, the internet flipped the table, so to speak, and tried to halt its sales as much as they could. This went as far as boycotting Twitch because it had ads for the game. If you think that's crazy, someone also created a website where the user can search a streamer and see if they streamed the game on their channel. The goal, I presume, was to allow the user to know if they should keep supporting the streamer or not, because they played the game? I'm honestly not sure, but it definitely encapsulates the release of this game quite well. People with social media influence were afraid of showing excitement for the game, as it meant taking an indirect political stance. Even a year later, I'm still unsure of how this video will be received, as the issue is still ongoing and a lot of people have preconceptualized ideas on the whole subject. It's definitely one of the reasons why I decided to push this segment as far as I could in the video, because I trust that, if you've watched it so far, you believe me when I tell you that I have absolutely zero stakes or interest in any of it. My goal is to specifically talk about the game, a game that I feel could have been done so much better, and that I want the sequel to be a lot more and a lot better fleshed out than what we just currently got. Paradoxically, I also strongly believe that it's one of the main reasons why this game sold as much as it did. Most gamers are casuals that grew up with the Harry Potter movies. They don't follow video game journalism or watch lengthy videos like this one. All they wanted was a game that would allow them to experience their Harry Potter fantasies, which this game delivers on immediately. The controversies also had the opposite effect, in the sense that it made more people aware of the game's existence, which in turn encouraged day one sales. There's a saying in the marketing world, which is that negative marketing is still marketing. You're spreading the word all over the internet, so people who are made aware have a higher chance of tuning in just to see what the fuss is all about. That, and whoever disagrees with the movement, will do the opposite just to support the opposition, which again leads to more sales. Anyways, if you've seen my 2023 end of the year video, you'll know that I love talking about facts and sales numbers, so I'll end it here and move on to why I brought it up in the first place. One thing that stuck out to me on my first playthrough was how safe and sterile the game felt as a whole. I think the devs were extra careful when creating anything on the game, as they knew that some people would scrutinize every little detail in search of something that they could use against them. Having no bad karma system helped guarantee that no one had something bad to show during said articles. Following the movies closely allowed them to also replicate their blueprints of success, while avoiding the pitfalls that would displease fans of the license, and the list goes on. I obviously have no proof of any of this, but I know that if I were in their shoes and I wanted to guarantee the job security of everyone involved, I would triple check everything and do my best to remove ahead of time anything that could be used against the company. In that sense, I applaud the team for doing one heck of a job, as the backlash rapidly ceased when they realized that the game was selling like crazy and that fans were, overall, very pleased with their purchase. They essentially couldn't find any new talking points, and spinning the same story over and over again could only get you so far. But in the long run, sterilizing the game to this extent came at the cost of the experience, hence why I volunteered more than a year and a half of my life to make this video. Also, I want to take this time to reiterate that, regardless of all its faults, I still really appreciate the game for what it is. I'm just really frustrated because I can see its potential, and I'm very disappointed that it never gets near it. It's that frustration that gives me the need to share my voice and make my magnum opus. I'm proud of what I've accomplished so far, and as I'm writing and subsequently reading this, I can't wait to see it come to an end and see what you, the viewer, think about it. If you've come this far and you haven't liked and subscribed, please do so, as it will mean the world to me in more ways than you can imagine. Speaking of appreciation, I'm done talking about all the things that are broken in this game. From here on out, we're slowly gonna go back up and talk about the thing that the game does well, starting with something that, interestingly enough, wasn't even made by Avalanche Studios. But that's a video for next week. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I hope you found this video interesting, because personally, I find part 2 to be the best part of the script. I love going deep into the game and talking about all the different issues that plague it. I'm sure that I went more in depth than everything else that you've seen, because honestly I can't find someone else that went this deep into Hogwarts Legacy. But I genuinely think that this was necessary, because at the end of the day, I genuinely want a really good Harry Potter video game, and I'm kind of afraid that, you know, with Warner Brothers closing a bunch of studios, needing a bunch of money, and now rushing the studio to make the sequel while also tying it to the TV series, it's kinda gonna be a shit show. But I'll get more into that in part 3. So please, like I mentioned previously, like and subscribe and get that notification bell at the same time so that you don't miss part 3 when it releases next week. So for now, thanks a lot for watching. Thank you for making this a gamer's dream a reality. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye now.